Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Urban Form and Transport Development Committee meeting Tuesday 11th of June. Welcome to members of the public, our staff and elected members. I don't have any apology. I assume that Councillor Mason is maybe just coming through. So if we'd take an apology for lateness from Councillor Mason, thank you, Councillor Clout, and seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour say aye. Against carried. So be aware that this meeting is being live streamed. We should all be able to say this without reading it anymore. The video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please remember to speak clearly into your microphones and only one speaker at a time for clarity. Please turn off your mobile phones, and also please, if they are on vibrate and they start vibrating, please hit the button so that doesn't continue. It's just about as noisy as some rings. We have public forum. First up today we have Peter Cooney and Nathan York, and also ably assisted in the background by Brian Stevenson, to discuss the Ponjee matter, which is on our agenda today, and we'll talk about it in a change of order of business after this public forum. But welcome, Peter and Nathan. Over to you to go through. We're allowing the full 30 minutes for this presentation and plenty of time for questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Council, staff. We want to cover off three things today. One is the housing report from Veros. Two is some of the financial analysis associated with key infrastructure, including Ponjee, which is the third component. It'll be shared between Peter and myself. Just in terms of the Veros report that has been supplied to Council, we've got a couple of key points we want to raise. One of the obvious ones for us is the report that's been distributed to Council is slightly different to the final report that was submitted to those that contributed as part of the research. So there are some differences there. As we can tell, the key differences is related to the increase in retirement villages. We feel that retirement villages shouldn't really be part of the analysis. We are really talking about general housing for the wider public. And therefore, if you exclude the retirement village component, be it the report that we received or the added number that has been provided to Council, the numbers are much worse. We're talking about 60%, or in the order of 60% supply to the long run average requirement for the medium term, 1 to 3 years. And for the 4 to 10 years, it's way worse than that, and it's hovering around 40-odd%. Now, this is the key message that we need to reinforce as part of this report. We're also concerned that Omokoro's been sort of added to this research analysis when specifically we're dealing with Tauranga City Council and its own jurisdiction. So there are some reservations and concerns associated with that Veros report. It doesn't remove the issue, it just adds to the issue, is there's a significant lack of housing supply in this jurisdiction. It's much worse than what is actually contemplated in the report, and it's not a new message for anyone. So that's probably the key things from the report. Obviously, how do we resolve the shortage? And there's some growth areas that have been worked through. In terms of the financial planning, we as a company have been trying to work through the various financial planning assessments associated with the development contributions, large infrastructure associated with the likes of the PEI, Te Ukoro Drive, and of course Ponjee. We are concerned the large numbers at stake involved. We've tried to decipher some of the material based on the information we've been provided. The extent of the preliminary and general's budget, the contingency allowances and the consultant fees are way out of sync with what we would typically have if we're delivering those type of projects. Way out of sync. We also started to try and delve into the DC contributions analysis, and happy to be proven incorrect, but the land purchase associated with the PEI Pond G, the Simmerlink property, is in the DC calculations, but presumably there's a net off for the land that isn't used for those pieces of infrastructure. That's not apparent to us. And thirdly, Pond G, we are surprised we're even having this conversation. With the backdrop of the housing supply issue and the ability for this Pond G system to deliver housing, immediate housing, which is in the realisable supply that's associated with the Veros report, we are really surprised why we are having this conversation. It's an absolute need for this infrastructure now. So we can't afford, and we've relied on the delivery of that infrastructure to get this piece of development underway, and we can't afford to have that scenario play out. Peter wants to comment on some of his previous experience in that regard. So this is an absolute need today to unlock some housing supply that's in serious shortage in Tauranga as it stands. We suspect there's going to be quite a few questions, so I'll let Pete talk and then we can come back to some Q&A.
Yeah, look, as Nathan says, I'm surprised I have to be come down here and present to this meeting. I mean, this is absurd in my view. This supply that we're talking about in Papamoa, and also I've got another issue out at Tauriko. It represents about 30% of the product that's left in the next 18 months, in my view. We've done our homework as a company. We look 5 years ahead, and I don't know, and I've said this so many times, at the end of this year, I don't know where I'm going to get the land from. And here we are discussing some infrastructure which needs to go in, has to go in. You can't retrospectively put infrastructure in. You've done it to me at Kennedy Road, where you've told me 3 years ago you'd have the infrastructure in. It's still not in. I've got 150 houses or sites that are going to sit there idle, waiting for the absolute incompetence of this council to get that pond built. It's ridiculous. We're just going backwards. We shouldn't be talking about infrastructure. You need to forward fund infrastructure, like Pond G. This is why we're in such dire straits at the moment. I mean, Tauranga, regionally nationally we've got a problem, but regionally, I believe we will be the worst hit region in New Zealand in the next 12 to 15 months. And I know that from the numbers we do around the country. So here we are arguing about a pond that needs to go in to satisfy our housing requirements. I've seen the front page of the Bay Times. We've got a major rental problem in the Bay of Plenty. I mean, that's just due to a lack of housing. We've got an issue with infill. You're not getting your infill. Go to Hamilton. 50% of their consents are infill housing. And the reason for that is because they've changed their infill and their policy and their regulations on infill, on how they do it. They've created a much smaller lots. So it's very attractive to develop infill. We're not getting any infill. We've been discussing this for 5 years, and we still haven't got anywhere on it. Decisions need to be made, and they need to be made quickly. So I honestly don't know why we're having a discussion on a Pond G where it represents 20% of the housing stock that's required.
All right. That's all you want to present to start with, is it? Yep, thank you. So we'll go to questions. Councillor Clout.
Thank you, Nathan and Peter. Just clarifying, Nathan, what you're saying is, in terms of our DC calculations, we are overinflating the costs, therefore the DCs are higher. Is that what you're really saying in that part of the conversation?
With respect to the budgeting of infrastructure, when we've looked at certain pieces of that budget and we've done our own assessment, we see items in the budget that are way inflated to what we would typically have as a budget if we were running that civil program. And the 3 areas that we specifically targeted or looked at that just were obvious to us have been overinflated were preliminaries in general, which is your P&G, the contingency allowance, and the level of consultant fees associated with those projects. And they were in relation to the PEI, PONG, and Te Okuro Drive or other roading plants. Also, but as part of the DC analysis, as we've looked at last year and this year, in the DC calculations, it appears that the purchase of the Simmerlink property is in for the whole amount, the circa 15, 16 million. But there should be a net off for the areas of land that aren't associated with that infrastructure, but it's not clear to us. But the whole amount has been loaded into the DC calculation as far as we're aware. So we're kind of looking at that and thinking, by the way, we're getting charged 20% above what last year was, and we're trying to understand why. That's where the discovery came about.
Yeah, I mean, P&G is, in a normal contract this size is 5%, it's not 29%. I would dearly love to take that contract, and I guarantee you I could deliver it for 10 million less than what you're proposing. I could almost guarantee it.
That's very helpful, thank you. Councillor Stewart next, then the Mayor, then Councillor Robson.
Thank you. We collaborate with Smart Growth, so is there any issue with Smart Growth, or is it the fact that we're not funding this PONG?
Well, to be quite honest, we're here in this position because of Smart Growth. You all sit on Smart Growth.
No.
And here we are,
Some of us.
Regional Council, Tauranga City Council, Western Bay Council sit on Smart Growth, and here we are, and we've been banging on for it for 5 to 7 years to sort it out, sort out your land supplies, sort out your zoning, and here we are in a major shortage. So tell me what Smart Growth's actually done for Tauranga. I'm sorry, but it's inept in my view. It obviously needs stronger leadership or someone that knows what they're doing, or greater representation from people like us.
Mayor Brownless.
Yeah, Nathan and Peter, what you said, Peter, preempted my question. Really, it was going to be, is it possible for you guys to tender or price the work and do it? Because we know that when council does things, sometimes the feeling is that, of course, we pay too much. Sometimes we've lately been faced with a lot of budget overruns on stuff that we've priced anyway. Is it possible for you guys to put the price in and then and stick to that, and then we can do our DCs based on that?
I think it'd be a really good opportunity to assess what we could do in terms of delivering this project. Perhaps we can take some of the detail that we have offline with management, but I think there's an absolute opportunity for us to deliver a project privately, but ultimately it needs to have the will of council for allow us to do that.
Well, thanks, because I think that's something I'd like to take up, you know, that if there is a way of doing it the same thing and saving money through doing it with you, I would rather, obviously, and I imagine all council would rather try it, provided that was all sorted out and nothing came back on us in the end as a result of doing it. So something maybe
Yeah,
we
I
can
think,
explore.
Mayor, you could easily do a PPP where we take the main risk, but you have the oversight into it as to making sure you're getting delivered what you actually want. And this is becoming more common throughout the country as well. Yeah.
Councillor Robson. Councillor Brown.
I'm conscious that the rules of engagement here are that we can only ask questions, but with the indulgence of the chair, I'd like to answer a question that's been posed by you and I think deserves an answer. In my view, and it has been that for a significant period of time, Smart Growth has been an abject failure. So I would agree with the comments of Peter Cooney. I am surprised, however, given our last interaction in this chamber, Peter, when I asked would you be prepared to pick up projects, you threw the ball back at council. I'm pleased to see you've revised your position, and I would thoroughly support us engaging with developers like yourself to pick up these projects. One of the challenges we face, and this is my question, I suppose, is the issue with regard to doing things via development contributions. Are you aware of the size of the shortfall? Repeatedly we hear that we are overcharging with regard to development and therefore the cost of DCs. However, we have a $40 million hole in our budget where we have failed to collect back development contributions. That's debt that supported the growth of houses and making people, certain people rich, certainly not councillors, right?
You
And-
could always,
and-
you could
and as
always be a
whole.
developer, John, and share in the riches. You could take the risk.
I retired, I don't have to work.
Risk, it's called risk and reward, and banks insist on us making a return, otherwise doesn't get developed. So I'm happy for council to play developer. I'd like to see it. Okay, so let us do it, but there will be risk and reward. Yeah, has to be. Yep.
Councillor Brown, next.
Thank you. Peter, you talked about PPP. Have you got examples where this has worked with other councils? Is it Hamilton or where else you've been developing that?
We're doing a lot with the Hobsonville Land Company in Auckland, or they call it Housing Land Communities, I think they're called now, which is a direct, well, it's all going to become part of the HUDA, Housing Urban Design Authority. We've done lots of joint ventures with them, along with we shared the any profits or any savings went to them, but we took the risk. But it was very easily managed from that perspective. Yep.
I can add to that in terms of some of the recent projects that Blue Heaven is undertaking. The Golden Sands crossing, the culvert crossing, was an example where we delivered that. It was well under budget in terms of where the budget expectations was, and there was a suggestion from staff at the time to carry on completing that kind of work.
Councillor Malloy.
With regard to land supply, I know Councillor Baldock, as long as I've known him, has been banging on about the fact that we need to be freeing up more land. That goes back, I think, 6 years or 9 almost. Hamilton City, 50% infill, that's a significant number. Can you give us any quick wins as to what we need to do to get to that space?
They've allowed their sites to go down to 200 square metres, and of course that just opens up a huge range of more land to develop. I mean, if you did that in Tauranga, you'd have some major infill projects going on, but we're still stuck in the old 350 net scenario and the old rules and policies that we have, like zero, you haven't got any zero allotments or anything like that. So there are some really quick wins, but I mean, the problem is that in my view, we keep going back out to consultation, and a few people have got the NIMBY syndrome, and therefore it gets kicked out because you're going to upset a few people. But the reality is, if you don't, you're just going to keep expanding into greenfield forever. I mean, they're getting 50% of their consenting, and they're about 1,800 to 2,000 lots a year. If they're getting 50% infill, I mean, that's a huge driver for a place like Tauranga. I mean, you can at least pick, in my view, just pick an area, pick the avenues or an area like that and experiment with it. Just do it. Just get on and do it. I mean, it's a logical area to do it. Everyone's pushing for it now. You've got Accessible Housing doing a project there that got awarded because we're building it. I mean, they've gone for greater density. We've just got to pick up the reins and run with it. Otherwise, you're asking us as developers to intensify, you're asking us to intensify as small as possible in greenfield areas. You're not willing to do it in the current areas, where your infrastructure is, where your city is, where your Cherrywoods are, where your Berettas are. That's where your infrastructure is. That's where your bus routes and everything are. That's where you should be intensifying. But you're pushing us to do it way out, which we're happy to do because the market is ready for it. But you've got to do both if you want to solve this housing shortage. You just can't go to developers with a limited amount of land we've got and get us to go down to sort of 20 square metres, That's the only way you're going to solve the issue at the moment. It's got to be a combined operation. But we've been messing around for so long with our infill. We really have, and I don't know why.
Well, I think many of us would like to see that. It just takes time now to change the rules, and that's what we're in process to do. But with Hamilton, Peter, the fact that they can achieve, like you say, 50%, is it partly, not entirely, but is it partly that the horses sort of vaulted here with a lot of the potential infill that happened in the 70s and 80s in Gate Parr and Maryborough and everywhere else, ugly stuff, that we don't have as much stock of what could be infilled as what Hamilton does because
No.
they didn't have growth?
No, I don't agree. We've had example after example. Lots and lots of areas that we can go and amalgamate and get that density in there. And we've tried with council, but they keep kicking us for touch. So we've stopped bothering. There are so many opportunities to do it. It's not funny. There are lots and lots of areas in Tauranga. There are lots of sites that just fall. They might be 20 square metres, 50 square metres short. You join it with another site, suddenly you can start to get some serious infill. We're missing the boat here.
Councillor Mason?
Peter, have you got any experience dealing with Maori multiply owned land? Because there's big opportunities there.
Yeah, we're doing a couple of joint ventures with them around the country. We're consulting with them on one here in Papamoa, but they're doing a retirement village. The thing with the iwi is they need to retain ownership. That's the core part. So therefore, retirement villages with the LTO are the most likely sort of solutions, and you can only do so much of that. The other area that would work for them, but again, you've got to get them all to agree, is the leasehold land with a fixed CPI. If you can get that with a fixed CPI, not a to market, then you'll have some traction. And we have been talking to a few of them, but as I say, it takes so long to rally them around the table and get them in the same sort of space. But we're sort of working with a couple at the moment. Yep.
Councillor Clout?
On the matter of infill and intensification, we're often told that sort of medium-rise 3-4 story apartments are really hard to make work in Tauranga. Can you just comment on that? Because clearly that's an avenue that, in theory, should work and allow greater population density.
One of the biggest issues with 3 or 4 levels is just the sheer cost of construction at this stage. And once you go to that level, you've got fire ratings, you've got all sorts of issues that come into it, and it becomes really expensive. So you've got to be certain when you're doing that 3 to 4 level that you're in an area which will sustain that pricing. So if you go the further out you go, generally speaking, the lower the price. So therefore, Auckland's no different. The reason they're not getting a lot of apartments further out of Auckland is the cost to build them out of Auckland, and central Auckland is the same price. But in Auckland you can get sort of $1 million for them, whereas further out in Manukau you're only getting $550 or $650, yet it costs the same amount to build them. So that's just a byproduct of the construction industry at present. It's an extremely, I think we've seen prices go up 10% a year in the construction costs, and it's in total disarray, especially in places like Auckland. So you'll find it hard to work in Tauranga because the cost of building it here will be a little bit cheaper, but not a lot cheaper than Auckland. You're at $4,000 a square metre. If you do the numbers, those apartments will be sort of reasonably expensive unless they're really, really small.
I think added to that, though, you also need the community and social infrastructure wrapped around those locations. Yep. So they're living obviously in small environments, so that they need to be able to spill out into the wider community, and so that infrastructure needs to be in place as well in order for that to work.
Thank you. Councillor Robson and Councillor Mason.
Yeah, 2 questions. One primary one and one a supplementary. Is your view shared by the rest of the developers?
Yeah, absolutely. Scott Adams, not here, he sent us a text and email to say the same thing, but you talk to all the developing community, we're all in the same boat.
No, I agree with that, and you've been here repeating this story. And
yeah.
Going back to smart growth, there is a developers forum that interacts with smart growth, has been for a long period of time.
Someone's not listening to us. It's that simple. Because we've been going on about this for a long time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Mason?
Yep, Nathan, in the report just makes reference to the multi-units that's, I think it was that Blue Haven was going to be waiting till the market matures.
Yes.
What exactly, could you just give us a bit more detail about what you mean by that?
To give you a bit of the backstory on how residential has evolved out east, out at Papamoa Golden Sands. So it's traditionally gone from your 800 square metre sections down to your 600, down to your 400. Now we are transitioning into medium density, which is effectively the 200 squares that Pete spoke of. Following on from that, we will transition into terrace housing, which is generally townhouses that are combined together in a small block, generally 2 levels, ground floor, first floor. So that is the next stage or evolution of housing out at east. the equation hadn't quite worked, whereby the added cost of construction, which was in the order of 20-25% to build to another level above, wasn't netted off against the reduction in the value of land. But the equation is right now. Beyond that, we will move into multi-united housing or residential, which is the apartments. But once again, that won't occur until there is some amenity, whether it be social or community amenity, parks and gardens, places to hang out, but also the commercial amenity. Like, you'll need doctors, you'll need, food and beverage, you'll need places where people need to visit. So those type of things need to be complemented with the apartment living.
Thanks. So the other a question Peter mentioned, if I ask him, is the you said earlier on that perhaps do a pilot for intensification. So we've got this plan change going on. We're well on the way. We've been listening and all the rest of it around the intensification. Or probably too late, but part of what Larry says that it takes time because we are subject to legal challenge if we don't go through the correct process for the plan change. Have you got examples where that's been either fast-tracked successfully?
The unitary plan in Auckland was fast-tracked. I mean, that's an example of being fast-tracked. But I mean, I'm just going back. I mean, you tried to do this in Gretton 5 or 6 years ago and you got pushbacks. I mean, this isn't new. No one's just had the balls to get on with and do it. That's all it is. No one's done it. You can do it. There's no reason why you can't do it. But you get a few upset constituents that sort of, and then you don't vote for it. I mean, you're always going to have people that aren't going to agree with it. Always. Intensification, that's what it's all about. It's about cities growing. And you've got to adapt to cities growing. And we're not adapting quick enough, in my view. This is a fast-growing city. It really is. It's one of the faster ones around the country. We're not adapting to it. Other cities seem to be able to adapt to it. I mean, I'm going to give you an example, not an example, but it's changing direction. In 12 months, in about 15 months' time, our consents will be half what you're getting now just because of land supply. That's $360 million on average you're not getting into this community. You're talking about having upset constituents now. Boy, you're going to have a hell of a lot coming up shortly because that's a large part of this economy. So look out, that's coming.
Thank you. Councillor Morris, I think you probably final question.
Thank you. I just want to pick up the infill subdivision issue because it's something that has a long lead-in time, and one of the things we can do at council, of course, is change the city plan and the minimum size of subdividable lots, etc. But covenants made under the Property Law Act, if they don't have an expiry date, are there, some of them for a very, very long time, if not in perpetuity. And I'm just thinking, my particular subdivision, I'm on a 730 square metre site under the city plan, under 650, up to 650 you can do a subdivision on that site. Now I can't subdivide my site because the developer, put covenants on, and hey, I entered into that agreement by purchasing the section, etc. But there's a covenant there that cannot be subdivided. So the city plan may reduce over time the minimum lot size, but covenants which remain with the land for a long time prevent it. So I guess my question is, going forward, given that this is a decades-long issue, would you guys undertake to, within your covenants that you put on your subdivisions, not to have a clause in there saying that you can't subdivide?
If you look at the subdivision that's coming up that Nathan and I are talking about, I don't think you can subdivide a 220 square metre site. If you take Tauriko, our site's at 320 now, you won't be able to subdivide it. I hear what you're saying. Back in those days, I think there was a bit of, in the early days where people were building 700 square metre sites and then doing a transportable house and putting them on the back. So developers countered that by putting covenants in. They all have a certain lifespan though, most covenants will fall off. But if you look at Tauranga, if you look at the Grettons, your Brookfields, your Mount Mauganuis, I mean, they haven't got covenants on them anyway. And those are the areas we're talking about really, because that's where the infrastructure is. I mean, we want this multimodal type system. We want to use public transport, but to do that, you need to be around amenity, and therefore they're the logical areas that need to be intensified, in my view.
We covenants have been useful going forward. It is all about design guidelines to get really good urban design outcomes. That's where they become really useful.
But these days, I don't think we're putting any of that on our covenants because the sites are so small now. I mean, we're getting down to some of the smallest sites you'll see in the Bay of Plenty coming up in this development, you know, all associated around Pond G. We're doing it at Omakarawa as well. We're down to 250 squares out there. So, I mean, it's here to stay, don't get me wrong. Yep.
And just closing out on the Ponji issue is that we've got 100 up front immediately and then another 100 in the second stage that will feed into Ponji. That's 200 houses.
Respect, I mean, I've seen it right across the country. Councils take a very risk-averse approach to delivery, and you tend to over-consult. Your consultant fees are just, we would use a third of the fees that you use alone, and you look at what your fees are in there. So and I understand it, you're spending public money, but you take this risk-averse, and so you over-engineer and you overdo everything. Whereas we take a lot more practical solution to it, and we don't need to have that many consultants because we've got a lot of them are in-house. But this is where you do a PPP, everything does get peer reviewed.
Thank you. One last question, Councillor Kirak, who hasn't questioned yet.
In terms of supply, and you mentioned 100 houses, the first stage, would you consider rolling out more and do the, say, 200 straight off? Because I can imagine, given the supply situation and the huge demand, that those 100 will just go like that.
We imagine so it will. The issue is ultimately around the ability to construct and deliver within that time frame. So we would absolutely commit to getting the whole lot done, but we'd have to stage it mainly around the finite parameters around construction.
Yeah.
Okay, so ultimately we could probably realistically, physically deliver 100 a year, but we could commit to 200 without question.
It's the capacity of the market to deliver the services infrastructure requirements that hold you back from delivering 200 instead of 100.
Within a finite area, so there's only a certain area we can develop in.
So don't also remember that we are bound by banking covenants that, you know, you try and deliver 200 instead of 100, you got some major infrastructure costs up front and they want to see pre-sales. So where KiwiBuild has been, and not that we're doing it here, but where we've dealt with KiwiBuild in Auckland and other areas, they underwrite this sort of development and they say if you bring it on as twice as quick, we'll underwrite that those houses are sold, therefore it becomes bankable. So it becomes a financial issue. There's some major money we're talking about to bring on 200 lots.
Can I also add though that we've relied on the fact that we've been told that Ponji is going to be delivered mid next year, and the type of decision making that's made and why we're here today creates a whole bunch of nervousness and a lack of confidence that, you know, we rely on that advice. And Pete's obviously had a recent historical perspective where he's relied on infrastructure being delivered, particularly with stormwater, and it hasn't.
Yeah, look, we don't mind taking risks, market risk. The risk and reward we agree with. We don't mind taking that risk, but when we get led down the garden path that the infrastructure is going to be there, I'm sorry, it puts a real damper on whether we want to do further development. And I can tell you right now, we do more development out of this town than we do in this town for that very reason. The confidence, I'm losing confidence at 90 miles an hour.
Thank you very much. I think we'll draw that open forum to a close. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate your input and the advice you give us as we try and get through all of this. Next item is the chairperson's report. I won't have one today. Acceptance of late items, I'm not aware of any. And confidential business to be transferred into the open. Does anybody wish to do that? The only thing we have is the minutes of a previous meeting. Change to the order of business, though. I think I'll accept a motion to do Ponji now, or in a minute. And also, we may, during the confidential part of the meeting, have some discussion about the Veros report. So if we want to ask questions and drill into various sites, we may wish to do that in the confidential section. So we may break that up and then come back into the open to finish off that that one, which is DC 121. So if someone move to just change that order around, thank you, Councillor Brown, second Councillor Mason. To change the order of business, we'll bring forward DC 174. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So we'll move to the confirmation of minutes, matters arising and adoption of recommendations. Are there any corrections to the minutes, first of all? No corrections anywhere. Move Councillor Clout, seconded myself. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Any matters arising from the minutes? Councillor Clout, then Stuart.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, just wanting to know what follow-up has happened with Hannah Hobbs from Freeburn Road regarding the tiny house situation.
I wish to follow up on that as well. I emailed her and talked about the situation, but there are some pretty clear messages there in the minutes that need to be responded to. Can anyone report to that?
Well, through the chair, look, I don't know that any follow-ups occurred as a result of that, but we'll look into it, come back, yeah.
Next was Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Through the chair, on page 12 of our agenda, page 5 of the minutes, there's a bullet point stating significant infrastructure to support structures was already in the ground in many parts of the city. It's to do with progress on intensification plan changes. Could this committee or projects and services please have some sort of verification on that statement so we know before we go further down the track just where we are with the infrastructure that's in the ground? Because many years ago I understood that we'd have to spend a lot of money to get the right infrastructure, and that was one of the negative things about intensification at that time. So if we could have some verification on that, that would be helpful, please.
So through the chair, through the Te Papa intensification project, there is a specific infrastructure work stream as part of that project, which we're analysing the capacity in the waters, wastewater and transport networks, and that will come back to you as part of that work stream rolling through.
Thank you. And my second one through the chair is on page 15. There's a staff action to undertake to provide further information on destination data in relation to bus interchanges. Just wonder where we're at with that, please. It's referred to on page 15 of the agenda.
So there is an ABLE report that's coming back to you both in terms of the CPD and in terms of the Arataki suburban area, and that information is part of that, looking at expected loadings of passages, etc.
Is that your question too, Councillor Opperman?
Take the opportunity to get clarification supplementary. It's destination data, not destination projections. Will there be destination data supplied?
We have asked the Regional Council to come and speak to a committee meeting or council meeting on what's happening in terms of the services and the number of passengers using it. I can specifically ask that they address that topic as part of that. I'm just looking at Claire. So we were just trying to find out whether it's best at the next council and the next PSOC, trying to see which fits in with the agenda.
I do think it's quite critical. I've been looking forward to it, and I'm still yet to get it, and I'm not comfortable with what I've seen from regional council so far.
So we have asked them to come and present, and one of the things we've talked to them about, speaking to you about when they present, is how do you want data and information provided to you, what's the best mechanism. So we thought if they came and give an overview first, and so we've agreed that with the regional council, and we're just trying to find the appropriate date.
I think if we can be very specific with them so they are prepared when they come, that we're not talking about the census data we already know exists. We're talking about this data available through these that tells us where people are travelling every day, so we can try and line up what our chances are of shifting them in modes rather than just having guesswork. That's kind of what we have never had a decent reply to, I think, if we could. Councillor Carrack, did you have a matter arising? No. Okay, so if no more matters arising, thank you very much. We will move on to... are there any declarations? There are none. So we'll have business, and it'll be DC 174, the Wairaki Pond.
Did we vote on the minutes? I just think we might have. Oh, sorry.
DC 174, the Wairaki Pond G funding issues and options, page 99 in the agenda, in the written agenda. Christine, if you would introduce it to us, please. Thank you.
So through the chair, the reason this report is here in the first place is the money for Pond G is in the budget, but given the level of fiscal risk and the issues that council's faced through the last annual plan and the conversation that we've had about the upcoming annual plans and LTPs, it was our view that this is really a decision for the elected members, not for one for staff to take alone, that you needed to be aware of the risks and weigh that up. So very clearly there is a significant land supply shortage. We absolutely agree with the developers and have for some time that that is the case. There are a number of initiatives underway, both in terms of intensification and greenfields that we are working on. But in the interim, there is a shortage, so certainly bringing on the land in Wairaki will have some significant benefit, but there are also significant financial risks. So really this is about a trade-off decision, and it is one for elected members, as I say, to make, not for staff. We don't have the delegation to make this decision, and so we're bringing it to you to provide us with some direction. Amy, you want to talk about maybe some of the detail around the fiscal situation?
We've just got 3 slides here, so these help just to put it in context, so just a bit of background. It won't take too long. But firstly, this is a map of the Wairaki urban growth area broken into the 3 stormwater catchments. The stormwater catchment we're talking about is catchment C at the end, which is there, or for those that can't see that one, that's green just over here. And the pond itself is Pond G just here. So you can see it's only a small part of the overall Wairaki urban growth area. It's 37 hectares. The pond services all of that land within Area C, but it also services some key infrastructure projects, namely the Papamoa East Interchange and Te Okoroa Drive, which provide for wider development into Te Tumu, and therefore a small portion of the pond costs are funded via Te Tumu as well. This is just a close-up of the catchment. You can't see the catchment boundary quite so clearly here. It's this green dotted line. But what this one shows is the zoning within the catchment. So you can see the purple area is the employment zone, largely reliant on the development of the Papamoa East Interchange before that employment zone will be developed. There's a small part of the town centre fringe through here, which is the pinker colour. And then you have the neighbourhood centre zone and the grey area, which is the residential zone. So you can see that the residential zone makes up only a small portion of the Pond C catchment. I think it's roughly around 7 or 8 hectares, perhaps up to 9 hectares if you include the neighbourhood centre zone where residential development is also enabled. So I guess, and as set out in the report, the majority of the funding comes from Wairaki and specifically this catchment C area, but probably the majority of development within that catchment is unlikely to proceed until the interchange is built. So will be a delay and a risk there around funding for this particular project. And the last slide here, which I'll just briefly talk to, and if there's questions, I'll hand them over to Kate in the background, is the preliminary design for the stormwater pond. You can see the interchange here. This is the key pond structure here in the outlet, which goes back towards the Kaituna River. but a long swale system because of the need to get water from this upper part of the catchment all the way back down in this location. So that's just some background around the project. Obviously, in a broader perspective, as has been discussed already today, it is a trade-off around financial cost and risk versus bringing on the housing supply in a time when we're facing significant shortage of future supply in that regard. So I'll just hand it over to you for questions now.
Thank you. So questions, Councillor Malloy.
I guess, Christine, get straight to it. Two questions. One, can we afford not to do this in Ponji? And two, the opportunity for a PPP is your views, please.
In terms of not affording it, I think that it's a council decision. From a housing supply, we absolutely need the housing supply. From a fiscal risk, it's there. We, as you know, working very hard to get Tumu progressed, and that is certainly our intention, and the landowners in that area do want that area developed. But there is a low risk that doesn't proceed, and so it's a trade-off. But in terms of this area, if we can get this housing come to market, that's going to make quite a difference in terms of supply. In terms of the PPP, so you'll see in the report that we put the HIF bid in for this area. We didn't get funding for the stormwater pond part of that related to the interchange. We've gone back to NZTA and we have said to them we don't agree with the conclusion. They have reconsidered their position and said, yes, we agree. The stormwater associated with the PEI should be within the HIF bid. So we have not lodged our final HIF bid, and we're in the process of relodging that. We will come back to council to get that reviewed and approved if you're comfortable. What that does mean, though, is that any expenditure that we expend must meet the NZTA procurement processes. So the simplest way to do that is through a market competitive tendering process. So we could look at changing the way the project is packaged to be tendered, and the developers could look to put in a tender, which I think is something that Mayor Groundless suggested as a way forward. To doing a PPP will probably be difficult in terms of managing the process, but we can engage with NZTA around that and seeing how we can meet the procurement guidelines. But we can't just enter into a private discussion, because to do so would lose our ability to get the NZTA subsidy on it, which, as you can see in the report, is significant. So it's not something we'd want to lose.
If I could just clarify at that point, so the Ponji itself is within the HIF bid, so in terms of the 10-year interest-free funding, which has not been obviously confirmed yet, we haven't a loan agreement signed, but as Christine points out, it's the 15% NZTA funding which we are requesting, which is yet to be resolved.
So just supplementary to that, so we are sort of tied into this, what, for want of a better word that would be understood by those that presented to us this morning, the bureaucracy from central government to us and our own bureaucracy. We're kind of tied in these big projects where it does limit the opportunity for us to go out and try and do a PPP type arrangement.
I mean, we can explore with NZTA, and they do it in certain circumstances, so we can have that conversation with them, but it's not that common.
Just when we do come to resolution, I'll go other questions in a minute, but would you need anything further in the resolution than what's before us to actually pursue that, or we can just take a note from us to look into it?
You just take a note and we can have those. I'm actually meeting with the funding manager from NZTA Wellington tomorrow, so I could have a discussion and explore whether that may be feasible.
Brownless next.
Yes, it probably really follows on, because I would like to see a way in which the developer is able to tender, just like anybody else, and based on what the developer has said, the price that they offer will probably come in less, unless there's something they discover untoward. So I'd like a way that was possible. I think that's still fair. Anybody can put a price in, but it's a way of testing those claims. So I would seek advice on how to word that resolution for that. And also the resolution at the moment says, approve the tendering and construction. Well, I thought it might be two different stages. Approve the tendering, but if the tender prices all are crazy, how can we approve the construction? So I just asked for a little bit of advice on that when it comes to the resolution. So as to what we might do there. Thanks.
So in terms of the developers tendering for work, they can do that as of right. My understanding is they were looking to have an arrangement where we didn't go to the broader market but engage directly with them on a PPP. So that's a different scenario. They can put a price in and a bid in for any tender that we put into the general market. They are all advertised on GETS, which is a public tendering website, and anybody can get to those. In terms of the tendering and construction, as usual, what we would do is we would come back, as we have on other projects like Aspen Reserve, where the costs came in higher than we thought, or when it's going to exceed budget. We have always come back before we award and said this tender's come in over a delegated authority of budget, and seek your direction. So that would be normal practice.
Supplementary to that, Mr. Chairman, if it was ridiculous prices, we're not beholden to go ahead with something that is totally over the top. Yeah.
No, it's actually the opposite. We can't. So we as staff don't have delegated authority to award a tender where we don't have the approved budget, or where the over expenditure exceeds the parameters of the CEO's delegation. So we would come back to you. We can't do it.
Thank you. Councillor Robson had a question. Then Malloy. Mason.
It's just, I worry sometimes we lock on to phrases and it reduces our flexibility. I would have thought there would be an opportunity to speak to our development community via various means, and I've already made reference to Developers Forum, about how we might get this done. What I'm concerned about is locking into a PPP and seeing the blocks with regard to that, where there are many ways of effectively obtaining, what we're talking about here is financing, not funding. The developers aren't going to pay for the thing, but it's just how we effectively get the money in to get it done now, and then how we pay for it later. So what I'm worried about is locking onto the phrase PPP and having a big discussion about whether we can or we can't do a PPP. That's not the only way we can work with people outside council or outside the usual way. For me, there's a need for a conversation here with the development community that I don't think prejudices the HIF situation or the NZTA situation, but actually puts us in a far more informed situation with regard to how we might go forward here. That's a question. Is that true?
Having discussions with developers and with organisations like Crown Infrastructure Partnership and Treasury around a whole range of funding and financing. Those conversations have been going on for some time. The only ones that look like they are going to fly at the moment are the Crown Infrastructure Partners and the Treasury Infrastructure Financing and Funding Arrangements. We've got further conversations with Treasury this week on those. There is always the opportunity for the developers to forward finance if they wish to. That's not something that has been agreed to in the past on any projects. I think what we're looking for here is council to continue in the traditional model, but we just wanted to make sure that you knew that there were risks associated with that in proceeding to do that, that staff didn't make a decision which was beyond our delegation, and then later on you go, how did that decision was that made?
It's just supplementary, I suppose, observation more than question. It's clear from what we heard this morning that the traditional model isn't doing what we need it to do. So I am loath to use the word innovation for fear of being labelled a hypocrite, because it's thrown around with gay abandon, but it does seem to me that a conversation with the developers based on what they said to us this morning can do no harm, and I get the feeling that conversation could start quite quickly.
Staff have given the indication that, or the agreement, they will have that conversation and pursue it.
I think that we need to be clear, that's a procurement conversation, not a financing conversation, and your questions were about financing and funding, which is a different thing, as I understand it.
In which case I'd be happy to move an amendment to make it clear that to me it's both.
You can move any amendment you wish when we get there. Next was Councillor Malloy.
Yeah, Christine, if we go ahead and build Pond G, and we would be looking hopefully to get NZTA assistance further down the track. are we locked into their processes? You know, because if we don't go through the processes that they normally expect, and we go ahead and fund it, and we don't go through those processes when it comes time for them to dish out the money, it won't happen. Okay, thank you.
Is there an answer to that question?
So if you don't comply with the NZTA procurement processes, you will not be eligible to receive funding from NZTA. That's a given on everything. When we did the retrospective funding bid, which you will recall, we had to go through a comprehensive exercise of demonstrating that we had in effect complied with the procurement policies, but they made that very clear that that was the last time that was ever going to happen, and that was because it was a retrospective arrangement, and we had sought at that time to get funding, but it had been declined, but on looking back, it should have been approved. So they have put us clearly on notice that that would not occur again. So we have to comply if we want to receive that subsidy portion.
Christina, Andy, in paragraph 15, in the last line, it says the processing of CDCs CDCs underway. A total number of residential lots be delivered within the Ponji catch has not yet been confirmed. So this decision will impact on the first 100. But we must have some. Is there some sort of ballpark figure about, or range of what could be held back effectively?
So I think, and the developers can confirm this, but they suggested 200 homes in total, with 100 in the first stage just before.
I could probably help with that question if that's okay. So in the comprehensive development consent application, there's 250 units for the total residential area. But in addition to that, we have listened and heard about the requirement for further housing. So we're planning for another 70. So it's 320 in total, of which 2/3 could be associated with Ponji, circa the 200.
That, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I think we all want to see some savings, and we also want to get on and do it and potentially enable these houses to be built. So I guess, we're looking at different options, PPPs, having the enable the developers to tender, not having the implications on HIF funding and NZTA funding. So by doing all this, we also heard from Nathan about the need to get on and do this, and we've potentially said that it'll be ready by, Ponji will be ready by mid next year, which we know there's pressure on that. So if we divert away and do a whole lot of work to try and achieve a better funding package, are we going to seriously implicate on the timing deadline? Because we're hearing timing and deadline is everything as well as funding. So we've got two pressures, delivering the houses and keeping the costs down.
Yeah, so Richard Conning, who can't be here today, is the project manager on this, and his advice to me is that he needs a decision today, and any delay will most likely affect the delivery date by mid next year, which could affect, therefore, developers' ability to get sections and houses to market. So we can, but if we can work, quickly and efficiently, and have some, I guess, informal discussions, over the next week or so, that those things should be able to work in parallel.
Councillor Carrack is next.
Nathan explained some cost differences between the council and potentially the private sector delivering this project. I can't recall what it was, but the element I'm thinking of, I heard a difference between, was it 5% and 30%, Nathan? Could you describe what that is about? And is that within the construction segment or pre-construction?
Yeah, so I think that was the PNG item, preliminary and general. Yeah, preliminary and general. I might hand over in a moment, maybe for Claire, who's not listening at the moment, to comment exactly on what that is. But in general, if you, yes, she is. If you look at the way these projects have been costed, first of all, they are just budget estimates, and we're not going to know what it's likely to cost to deliver until we go to market. But these projects have been costed through a rigorous process through the HIF fund, the HIF bids, business cases. We have employed professional quantity surveyors, and there has been peer review by separate quantity surveying firms there. The budgets have been set typically in a slightly different way than we have in the past, where we have set them at a P95 confidence level. So those budgets are probably set at a higher level than they have been in the past, so a 95% probability that costs will come in at or below that. Probably more contingency has been built into these projects than we have in the past, and this is a response to previous large-scale projects which have come in well over budget, and we believe this is a prudent way at this point in time to budget these projects and to ensure that we don't get into a situation of large development contribution under collection by budgeting projects too low for long periods of time. And of course we will go through competitive procurement processes to establish what the cost of delivery will be. In terms of the preliminary and general item, Claire, are you
Claire?
able? That's right, Claire, could you please explain to the committee in terms of transport projects what the preliminary and general item and within budgets generally covers?
Yes, so that would normally cover the setting up of the site, the establishment of the site by the contractor, building the temporary accommodation, all of those sorts of things. Some of the site supervision, MSQA, and those issues, I think.
We just describe what MSQA is too, because I don't know if that's a common term that elected members will be a bit aware of.
So that relates mostly to the site supervision of the contractor and all of those sorts of things. So the consultant or council checking on that work. Yeah.
So just follow up. So some of this, the quite large difference, you're prepared to speak to the developers, e.g. Nathan, with an open book approach and try and satisfy Nathan's concerns, because if I was in Nathan's shoes, I'd be, I'd have quite serious concerns.
Yeah, so we've provided all of our detailed costing information. We're quite happy to sit down with the developers and work through that. But I think, like I say, once the projects are tendered, then you move towards a much greater level of certainty around cost, and then those costs will be updated in the development contribution policy going forward on that basis.
Councillor Malloy, I believe, was next, and then Mason again, and then Morris.
I'd just like to venture to suggest that, I see here that the NZTA funding is worth about 1.2 or 1.3 million for that project, a project of between 9 to 10 million. I would suggest that quite possibly, a PPP may deliver it with that sort of saving. So you might be able to dispense with NZTA on that issue.
That was a question? Okay. We got it, thank you. Councillor
Let's ask about the impact, the economic impact and impact on the industry if we don't make this decision potentially and the 100 lots doesn't go ahead by 2020. With the tailing off of sections available for development, what could the potential impact on the industry be? That's job losses, that sort of thing.
I would suggest probably quite significant, because it's not like those 100 houses can be replaced and built somewhere else in the city because of the broader supply shortage. So that's 100 houses and all the labour and the businesses that contribute to those that will be out of pocket. So I don't have a number to put on it in terms of jobs or economic impact, but it would be quite significant.
The other economic impact is because of the less land supply, the house prices will go up. So I mean that is affecting every person who wants to buy a home. just pushes the general market price up.
Right, Councillor Morris will have the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, appreciate the papers around, you know, it's not around procurement, but of course there was a statement made earlier this morning in public forum on the public record around council's ability to get value for money, you know, through construction and that process. Can and elected members, my colleagues have talked about having further discussions with members of the development community to kind of tease that out a bit. Can that be reported back, the result of those conversations be reported back also publicly as well? Because I think the challenge has been put out there publicly. I think that it needs to be addressed publicly as well, what the response is.
Comment and perhaps hand over to Marty. So I think there's a broader question here, not only related to growth projects, about the method of procurement that council goes about and how does it procure. So at the moment we're guided by the procurement policy which has been adopted by this council, which sets out around value for money, but it also sets out a requirement for a competitive tendering process for anything over 200,000 to be put into the general market or selected market, and based on a series of criteria that are established for each piece of work, those competitive tenders assessed and the best value overall selected. So that's the frame that we work. There are other ways of potentially working, but I think that's a broader whole of council procurement question as opposed to this. So I'd, on that basis, hand it over to Marty.
Through the chair, look, I was just going to reinforce what Christine said, is that we have well-established procurement processes in order to seek best value for money and quality product at the end. If we were to depart from that, I think ultimately we'd still need to be able to demonstrate that we're delivering value for money and to withstand public and audit scrutiny. So nothing is impossible. However, there are obviously guidelines that we must operate within, and ultimately we need to be able to answer to you and to the community and to the audit office.
I guess the question I'm asking is, a challenge has been put out there. Would it be able to be reported to a committee of council whether developers take up the opportunity to participate in that process at a later date? Because I think challenge has been put out there. If they choose not to participate in that process, I'd like to know. Yeah.
So what you're asking is, if we proceed with the public tender process, is there a bid from the development community? That's certainly something we can report back. We do put the results of all tender process online, but I don't know if we define specifically, but we would be able to, we wouldn't disclose the quantum of the tender, but whether or not someone tendered, we could do that.
Just hold here. I just notice our developers would like to make a contribution. I'll allow that. Nathan.
Thank you, through the chair. I just want to reiterate the comments we made earlier on today, in that where we felt that we could really add value is the delivery of infrastructure. So the delivery of infrastructure relates to the design, the project management, the costing, the specification, and ultimately the delivery of infrastructure. We are talking about a specific piece here which only relates to the tendering of a construction of design that's already been completed. So there is a difference. We would take it from the whole gambit of from concept to delivery. This particular point here only relates to the delivery of a pre-designed outcome that's already in place. And we are, and it was a good point that Len raised, we are conscious of timing, but in terms of delivery, we would take it from the get-go. And so with this type of project, you've had the design that's been done by, I assume, BBO, the costing's been done by BBO, and to an extent, we would look into that as a starting point, not add the contingency, look at the design to an agreed budget rather than add the contingency on top. That's how we would approach it differently.
All right, thank you. Look, I think we need to come to the resolution in front of us. There may be some amendments coming forward from elected members, but what I'll intend to do is move the motion A and C, if I have a seconder, and then if any have a desire to make any amendments, we may need to take short adjournment for wording to be worked on, but I'll move A and C. Seconded, Councillor Malloy. Speaking to it, I hope the answer has been given as to why this is on the agenda today. It is about a risk to council. It's not about re-debating whether we need PONG or not. Personally, I believe it's a no-brainer. We need to go ahead with this as quickly as we can, and not have the problems we've had in the past with trying to deliver just in time and so on. We know the time is now. We need to get on with things so we're not holding up housing supply any further. There is an urgency to this, but we mustn't get confused with the difference between funding and procurement in our processes here, and we are locked into seeking funding. We were for the HIF project. We had to start work on it way back there in order to get into that process. I take the point made by Andy that we've been very conservative in those. When we were applying to the government for an interest-free loan in order to benefit the community, we've allowed perhaps more in there, but that will get refined as we go through the process. And when we, as the resolution says, and see when we come to the development contributions policy, we'll have got down to a lot closer of what we really believe it's going to be, and we hope that we'll have input from many sources to get that sorted. C is a worry though, because we're going to have to do that without the guarantee from NZTA from their contribution, and that is just the nature of where we are at the moment. In many areas around the city, we're not getting clear decisions from NZTA as to what they will contribute to. We can't wait until they do make that decision. We need to go ahead. I take the point that our developers have made this morning. There is experience will trump consultants any day of the week. When we have people making designs and so on, obviously costs are greater. The people who are on the ground delivering things all the time know how to do it, and as much as possible we should try and benefit from that and have these discussions. I'm all in favour of having discussions. But as the point was made earlier about PPPs, when we introduced PPPs into New Zealand some years ago, they are only effective when you start at the very beginning. And those with experience on the ground can start saving money right from the get-go. Once we've already got involved and designed things and stuff, we've already spent half the money, quite honestly. I'm in favour of those discussions going ahead. Let's keep open minds. I believe we try to. But we are in a different space than the developers who are on the ground delivering stuff for the city, a very needed process that they and service they provide. We are in a different place, and we have to work through our systems as well. It would be a shame to lose 15% of the funding from NZTA because we went off and did an agreement that they wouldn't accept, so we'd have to work that through. So I think we should pass this today, get on with it, but then continue to see what we can do going forward in this. Councillor Malloy.
Yeah, briefly, this strongly supports the government's demands, the supply of housing in Tauranga, but also in the country. It also strongly supports their GPS, their own GPS, what they demand, the GPS, and it's hard to believe that NZTA won't eventually support this. It would sour our relationship with them over the years, and I think not only that, it would sour relationships right across the country if they didn't back up something that so strongly supports everything the government is trying to do. So, and I believe we have to go ahead with it.
Councillor Brown, Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were looking at perhaps an amendment that would enable the developers to be part of the conversation for Pond G, but it appears the horse is bolted for Pond G. We're too far down the track. But I think the clear message from the developers is that timing is absolutely critical, and I hope that even that through the tendering and construction process that we have a really hard, fast, non-negotiable deadline for this project to be completed so that we can get on and deliver, build these houses. And I hope that staff will be able to identify future infrastructure projects much earlier where we can have those conversations with the developers and other people in the community delivering PPPs, etc.
Councillor Mason.
Yep, all good words. My particular concern is with the impact on the industry and the wider economy. If we delay the decision, if you just look at the numbers, this is on the back of an envelope stuff, of course, but if the first 100 sections with the houses, and not just the development of the section, but the price of the houses, the wages, the floors, the construction of the houses, etc., that first 100 houses is, if you take an average of 700,000 per house, is $70 million. Then another 230 sections, another $154 million, all coming to about $224 million. That's a heap of business out there. It's a lot of jobs. It's a lot of peripheral impact on all of the other industries that are suppliers to this industry. So, for a very small amount of money to tick this off, to get it going, there's a lot at stake. Let's look at what really counts out there, and it's keeping our people employed and our economy going well.
Thank you, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to enlighten colleagues to a fascinating discussion that was held last night at the Papamoa Residents and Ratepayers Association on this particular issue from the existing residents' perspective, formerly known as the Papamoa Progressive Association. I think members would acknowledge, and even staff would have seen in various communications from members of that group over the years, how passionate and determined they are to see the Papamoa East interchange delivered as soon as possible. And of course, these are the works leading up to it. But there was an incredibly fascinating discussion last night when it was raised about NZTA funding not being confirmed. And nearly half of the people there, about 60 or 70 odd people there, existing residents, nearly half of the people there, including some of those who have been most passionate and outspoken about Te Okoroa Drive and the timing and all that sort of thing, who expressed a view that the council in its dealings with NZTA and government should not proceed until funding is confirmed, and that risks, of course, delaying this particular important project. And of course there was discussion about Domain Road, which we'll have later on as well, but I thought that was fascinating. We've got a group that is, sole purpose is to advocate for the residents and ratepayers of Papamoa, but they were so concerned with the government's position on transport in the city that they were prepared, in the interests of the wider city, nearly half of them were prepared to put at risk a project as important as this, to send NZTA and the government a message that they need to get their house in order, and that the petrol taxes and the road user charges that they are paying as a community needs to actually come back to this community and fund this infrastructure. That being said, there was a majority that was certainly of the view that we need to get on with it. But I just raised that for information with our colleagues, that there was a significant number of people, some of whom are the most passionate advocates of this project, that the government needs to be sent a message. Anyhow, that being said, I do support it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clout, and Councillor Robson.
Thank you. Absolutely support this this resolution. Thank you to Peter and Nathan and co for coming and presenting so strongly and advocating. Obviously this is a big piece of residential infrastructure which is going to enable some 20%, I heard, of the available developable sections in Tauranga in the next few years. So, 20% is a big chunk of that, so we need to do everything we can to facilitate that development. So, yeah, definitely get on with it.
Councillor Robson.
Yeah,
shoot for the sky. I'd like to move an amendment that the report DC 174 lay on the table until the next council meeting, and that staff be instructed to work with the development community to bring back a revised section or an additional section to the report which outlines an option analysis for how we might proceed. And if I got a second, obviously I'll be happy to speak to it.
Is that the full content of your amendment as you've spoken it out? We'll just have to get it typed, but those who heard it, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Carrack. Okay, we will need to get that written down. Therefore, I think we might just ask you to come up and repeat that to our secretary, and we'll take a short adjournment, 5 minutes. It is break time, but if we can just get this typed in quickly, I think we can go on. Elected members, the seconder of the amendment has withdrawn his seconding, so unless there is another seconder, or it's been sorted, we will need to proceed? So the seconder for that amendment that was put has withdrawn, so that amendment is not being put. If there is another amendment, it needs to be put forward now. Otherwise, I will proceed with the original motion. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, speaking to the original motion, as the amendment's effectively being withdrawn, and following conversation with staff, accepting that the point I wish to make via the amendment could be better made via an alternative resolution, which I think will be coming. I am a little concerned that once again we're in a situation where we face, a bit like Durham Street, a no-choice situation. We're getting information at a point in the conversation where there is no alternative option to progressing, a bit like we faced with extending the budget for Durham Street. And I'm concerned that we're effectively out of the process, and this is another example of that. Now, it may be that everyone's following, you know, traditional, I think was a word used earlier, ways of doing things. But clearly, if we wind up in a situation where governance is repeatedly faced with, there is no alternative, you agree to this, there is no upside, there is no alternative, you know, it sort of takes us as governance out the loop. The advice I've received is that there would be more sense in, rather than tying the G thing and postponing it and putting it at risk and appreciating the downsides of that to make my point, that I'd be better to make a separate resolution. So I'd like to foreshadow a separate resolution on how we approach projects of this nature and the requirement for the involvement of the development community at the beginning. But that's foreshadowing a future resolution. With regard to the motion on the table, reluctantly, I support because I have no choice, and it is the right solution at this stage. I just don't think we should be in a situation of being boxed off like this.
Thank you. Other speakers to the motion? Councillor Carrack.
I'm really glad that I haven't heard any members use this as an opportunity to play the political football, you know, given the dire situation of our housing, and use that as a political football to get government funding, because really I don't think it'll work. You know, the government will do what the government wants to do. They've got some funding issues. I'm talking about NZTA, which is an agency of government. We need to progress this to provide housing. And when you think about, you know, using it to get government funding for roading projects, you need to consider that those people who are well housed, as the people were out the Papamar meeting last night, comfortably housed, taken a position where they would support us saying no to this to try and get some leverage for government funds. They have got a home to drive to. Sure, you know, a delay in transport projects might mean it might take them a minute or two longer to get home, but they have got a comfortable home to arrive at. What we're talking about here is the many thousands of people that desperately require housing. We cannot hold it up.
Thank you. Any other speakers to the motion? In which case I will have a right of reply. I think that's a very good point, Councillor Carrack. We do have a crisis of housing. We need to move forward. I think when we want to change procurement policies and procedures in the midst of a resolution such as this, we are in danger of getting some unintended consequences. If we want to do that, we should address it through the policy processes and look at ways of engaging more often in PPPs. I think they do add value, or they do help keep costs down and so on, but they must be done at the very beginning of a process if you really want to benefit from the experience that's in the industry, and then take us through design and right through to delivery. So I think this is the right decision for today. We do not want to hold this up. So I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That is carried. Thank you. We will now take our break for morning tea. Thank you again to those that have assisted us this morning from the development community, Peter and Nathan. We will recommence in 15 minutes' time. All right, thank you, members. We will reconvene. If I can have your attention, please. We have an additional motion under DC 174, which Councillor Robson wishes to put. Understand that it is being seconded by Mayor Greg Brownless. The wording we'll put up on the screen very shortly. It is there. That staff work with developers to identify growth projects for which there are opportunities to consider alternative design and procurement approach. Report back to Urban Form and Transport Development Committee on these discussions. So that has been put and seconded. Councillor Robson may speak to it.
Yeah, I think it was clear there was an offer, more than an offer made by the development community. The idea has been run past Peter and Nathan from earlier discussions. They're comfortable, they would like to be involved. As Councillor Morris pointed out earlier, you know, there's been an offer made, a challenge almost, so let's get them in the tent, rather than being on the outside of the tent doing what people on the outside of the tent do. I see no...
Thank you. Mayor Brownless.
Just encapsulates the discussion that went on earlier, and I believe that everybody feels that that's a good way to go forward.
Any other speakers? Question?
I think through the chair to Christine, is there like an existing list of these kind of projects that you could readily identify? Thank you.
Yes, yep, absolutely. List of all the growth projects.
All right, any other speakers? Councillor Mason, Councillor Stewart.
Very happy to support it, and hope that it's the start of a new open-minded approach by all councillors to work with PPPs and other alternative forms of procurement and development. So that's excellent to see. I'm delighted and very happy to support it.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very supportive of what's on the table. If you keep doing things the same old way, you get the same old results. So thinking outside the square, working collaboratively with the developers, I think will provide better opportunities with better outcomes.
Thank you. Councillor Malloy.
Happy to support. You know, looking for new opportunities is incredibly important, and it's a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Great, thank you. We'll move on to DC 171, NZA funding issues. We have Mark Hasley from NZTA. If you'd like to come forward, Mark. Appreciate you coming to present this to us and answer questions, so hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There we go. Good. So, yes, thank you for inviting me. Obviously, why I'm here is really to support the item following this is in terms of your review of NZTA funding issues as it relates to particular projects. I'm aware, obviously, hopefully you'll all recall 2 or 3 weeks ago, not sure when, there was the stakeholder tour when the chief executive and other senior staff came round and tried to give some clearer messages around NZTA funding of local projects to give some more clarity. What I'd like to do today is talk about some work we've been doing that perhaps you haven't been aware of so far, and some that you already are, and updating you on those, particularly on some thinking around how we might optimise Tauranga's key transport corridors. So we're moving quite swiftly away from housing and urban form into a little bit of detail about how the network could work and some possibilities there. So what I thought I'd focus on is some thinking that we've been underway on in the Baylink sort of Maunganui Road, Hewletts Road corridor. Your council will recall that a while ago an underpass was approved as part of the Baylink project to better integrate pedestrian and cycle access between the Arataki area and the Matapihi area. And that was thought to be consistent with the general thrust of the city's cycle network strategy as well, to better connect the city. So that underpass is approved, and now we're in the phase of planning the detailed implementation of that as part of the Baylink project. What we've also been doing is having a look at options in the Baylink footprint to support the Regional Council's public transport network, its PT Blueprint. So I'll daylight some of that information for you. And I also wanted to use that as a kind of, you know, a jump-off point to introduce you to some managed lane system thinking that we've been having with our partners, which could apply along that corridor, the Hewletts Road corridor, and it could apply to other parts of the city as well. And that's where I think we get into more of an UFTI level type conversation about what the transport system master plan could look like in the short, medium, long term for the city. I'd also like to give you a bit of an update on some optimization work that's already in place in terms of the Barks Corner and Elizabeth Street Takitimu Drive roundabout metering trials. So I'll give you that. And I guess just a point to make is to note that the design, some of the design principles, I guess, that would undermine, that makes the foundation of this is all about making better use of our existing transport corridor footprint. It's about, for example, managing lanes rather than extra lanes. And it's about looking at our opportunities to influence travel behavior through the network prioritization process. So just taking that first point, some may be aware that we've been having a look at what are the options within the Baylink design footprint to better support the PT Blueprint and bus services that would be using that part of the network. What you see above you, if I can get the pointer to work, there we go. So this is the Girvan Road intersection as it would be once the project is built. There's the flyover going across there. You've got Girvan Road, Matapihi Road, Owens Place. So what we've had a look at, and here's one example, is well, what are the bus routes that are going to be going in and out of Bayfair? And basically, at the moment, according to the PT Blueprint, you've got a heavy movement of bus traffic coming in and out of the State Highway here along Girvan Road and linking in along to Lynx Avenue, the Farm Street route there. So what we've got here, if I can try and point out, is one example of how we might reuse some of those lanes. There's 3 lanes on the approach there, 3 lanes on the approach to Girvan Road. Dedicate some of those lanes for bus priority. So on Girvan Road there, you've got a bus priority lane option for turning left. You've got, on this option, a bus lane option down the middle lane there for turning right. These would be complemented by light systems, so a bus signal preemption system at those approaches to allow that to happen. So that's just one example of the kind of prioritized lane system you might have in place in the short term to support what we understand to be the bus network in the here and now. This is a similar picture of what it might look like, again, supporting the same network that we have in operation now at the what would be the Tamonga intersection between State Highway 29A to the south there. There's Bay Court here, and you've got State Highway 2 here. Sorry, Bay Park, yeah. Thank you. So here, what you've got is we're trying to basically accommodate three movements. You've got a crosstown connector service that's currently running along State Highway 29A that's coming in and out of State Highway 2 and going up to Girvan Road. And we've got services coming in from Papamoa and Tapuki going both ways as well. So again, we do have the basic design footprint within that construction project to have a serious conversation about reallocating lanes for bus priority use in peak hours or whatever the priority hours are, and supplementing those with some bus signal preemption systems to allow that to happen, to give them a jump start at intersections as well. So I think what I wanted to do after that was basically that's the kind of introduction to what could be, you know, a possible future for some of our corridors in the city in the form of what you might call managed lane systems. This is where, in terms of the principles of this type of approach, we put in place active management of lane use. We prioritize those lanes by time, user type, direction, speed, if necessary. It also gives us the opportunity to have automated enforcement systems in place rather than manual systems. So you'll see in the picture here, for example, just as a template, as it were, you've got sort of a priority bus system type infrastructure running down the middle here. You've got active speed management systems in place. You've got roadside infrastructure here. That's a CCTV camera there, which you could use, for example, to monitor or automatically monitor whether, if it's a car sharing lane, that there's enough people in the car that it's compliant. If it's a bus lane, it's a bus, it's not a car, that type of thing. So that's the kind of thing that we could look at through the UFD project as we go. Oh.
You want to take questions as we go through, Mark, or do you want to get through it?
I'm happy to take questions.
All right, we'll pause here for some questions then.
Sure.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. Great idea with the managed lane systems. We don't have anywhere in Tauranga that's 10 lanes wide. So how does this work with our current infrastructure?
Okay. Well, can I get on to that? I think I mean, it's the principle of how where you've got 4 lanes or more, which there are some sections of the city where there are. You can do this, and with the Baylink footprint, there are sections where you do have that. You've got flyover lanes, you've got at-grade lanes as well.
All right,
I'm wondering, Larry, if I finish this little bit, then we just
carry on then.
Is that okay?
Yeah, I think maybe better.
Sorry, thank you. Through the chair, yeah. So just some examples of what managed lane systems look like in cities where there's multiple lanes and expressways and what have you. On the right there, particularly interesting example is a truck moving barriers to the left and right, where you've got a tidal flow system in place, where that central lane there is perhaps used for one direction in the morning and another direction in the evening. That's smart use of a lane to recognize tidal flow. And here on the left here, I think this is an example in San Francisco where we have a bus running during peak hours only down the central median to give that priority. So what we've done, and appreciate that not all of the corridors are 6 lanes, but we do have sections of between the Harbour Link Bridge and out to the Eastern Link where we've got flyovers, and we do have in effect a 6-lane profile. There are some options here around prioritizing the central lanes, for example, the flyovers. We could have a look at prioritizing those for high occupancy vehicle only, for buses only, for trucks only, or some combinations thereof. Another kind of concept we could look at is prioritizing the outside lanes. So these are where you've got some at-grade priority and where you've got, again, it's a similar combinations where you might have bus priority or car sharing priority or truck priority again, or some combination there of running along the outside lanes. And the choice of how these, whether you go for one or the other, is not also on what type of movement or people movement you're looking to prioritize, but what's the nature of the corridor itself? What are the access constraints either side, in particular? And where are the bus routes going? What are we serving going to and from? Then you have, as I hinted earlier, on a template basis, you could say prioritize both lanes in one direction in the peak hour on a flyover, for example. Variation on that. We had a look at some of the bridge widths on the Baylink flyover, and we thought that actually there might be scope to allocate an extra third, if narrower, lane on those flyovers for tidal flow. And again, that could be depend on which direction you're traveling in. So I'll just, for me, just in summary, and then there'll be a good point to break for questions, I think. Just going back to those maps on the bus priority options at Baylink, there's an opportunity now to do a more detailed evaluation on those options and select a preferred option at Baylink if we wish to support the PT Blueprint more actively. The managed lane system conversation is a bigger corridor conversation that we need to have. They do exist in some form, I think, for the Baylink Hewletts Road corridor. They may apply to other corridors as well. I think that's a key point, is we need to continue to align work to that UFTI work to develop those responses and systems. The UFTI project at the moment, as some of you might know, is working on a foundation report, and we have recognised that the Hewletts Road corridor is a near-term priority as well. So that may be the type of work that could emerge through there. And again, just emphasising that NZTA funding is constrained across all activities right now in terms of progressing this work. I did anticipate that.
Thank you. I wonder if we could, Mark, go back to your first slide, and then we'll work questions through as we go. So we sort of, if there are questions regarding, the next roundabout, basically.
Yep.
So if we can just try and follow this order through, so we don't go back and forth, if we could. Councillor Carrack.
Thank you, Mark. Now, I know you use the phrase in terms of here and now, the present, but looking forward, and we're not looking at too many years forward, there would be a demand, a large demand for an express service from Papamoa East, and that obviously will go right through the Baylink project. So I see here and now you're providing for the current location of an interchange and the current route structure.
Yeah.
But in terms of express services that will just go straight through past Bayfair and those interchange opportunities, could that be accommodated within the current roading space or layout to provide a bus lane through there? Because as we know, the bottleneck the Hewletts Road presents at morning peak time. No problem afternoon peak time. We don't need any bus lane in the afternoon peak. That's Papamoa East bound because there's no hold up there. It'll be straight through. But morning peak, it's critical that we accommodate PT, because that's when people jump on a bus. If they're parked there on top of that flyover and look at a bus whizzing past and getting to the city 20 minutes earlier, that's when people get onto a bus, particularly if it's an express service. So that question is really important to me.
Yep.
Would you accommodate an express service bus lane through there? Could you?
Okay, so the engineering answer is yes, you can accommodate a bus lane through there, either at grade, I'll try and point out, you can either do it at grade coming through the roundabout with some signal priority to make it go through smoothly, carrying on, that could be done. It could be, yeah, if you had the right signalling coordinated system in, then you could do that, yeah, that could be done, yeah. You could also do it on the flyover. But what I need to point out, though, is that this is all dependent on what the bus network is. This is an option that says, here's an option that supports the current bus network. If we're talking about infrastructure to support a rapid system and a rapid service, a 10-minute turn up and go type service from Papamoa, we'd need to work with regional council to make that an integrated proposal.
And I'm sure it will happen, because what I'm concerned about is future proofing, to ensure that what's designed here and now will accommodate what's coming in the future.
Yes, and I guess the tension is with this is that Baylink as a project is scheduled to be finished by 2021. And it's, you know, the question on everybody's lips really is, what will it look like when it opens? What do we want it to look like when it opens? And that's not as easy a question to answer as we'd like it to be at this point. You know, do we want it to look like this, with a here and now system for bus priority, or do we want to look forward and try and bring something more, I guess, bring something bigger in terms of that Papamoa Express service on board? I think so, yes, I think so.
Councillor Clout. Thank you very much, Mark. Just two questions. First of all, those bus priority lanes only look to be about 50 metres long, so it seems to be like that's not really going to be of any great achievement compared to the traffic light management, which does make a lot of sense. That's my first question.
Okay, I can answer that. This is only one of, we actually have 3 or 4 other options, and one of the options here is, if I can stop my hand shaking over that right turn lane there, is to allocate that right turn lane all the way back from that stop line all the way back to the Tamonga intersection. So that would sort of come all the way back here. In a sense, that becomes a default bus priority corridor all the way. So that's one of the options.
I think that's quite encouraging. Secondly, you mentioned that the underpass has been approved to go through. What kind of safety messages or what sort of safety aspects are you able to put into that underpass to make sure that, you know, the public will be happy to use it?
Through the chair, that work is ongoing now. It's the design is it's more of a conceptual level at the moment, but the thinking in terms of design principles is to have the underpass as open aspect as possible. So not necessarily a closed-in roof that's dark and uninviting. Have good lighting and good aspect, and have an open roof, or open-ish roof. We don't want to get wet at the same time as being light. Yeah, that's on the table. It's on the table.
Mark, just supplementary to that, with your comments about the bus lane from Bay Park through, possibly. What about from there, though, all the way down Monganui Road to Hewlett's, which has been pushed for by the public considerably? Where are you at with that?
Well, where we're at with that through the chair is that's that type of option, in effect. So we don't have any detailed designs around what that could look like, and this is where we need to work with regional councils to see how serious we are in terms of putting high-frequency bus services along there before we can commit to putting infrastructure in place to support it.
Do you have funding to work on the business cases for that, or is
No.
it?
No.
All right. If you're on the same topic, I'll go. I know that Councillor Brown's sort of supplementary to that. It's okay. Go ahead.
Just looked at all the bus routes, and there actually aren't any buses from Papamoa through to the CBD that use Monganui Road. So we're talking about having a lane that goes through, like over the flyovers, but the 30 goes Pap East via Bayfair, 36 goes Bayfair to the CBD, not via Mount Monganui, 33 is Papamoa to Bayfair only, the Crosstown's Bayfair via Mangatapu, the Crosslink is CBD to Bayfair, and the Golden Link's Papamoa to Salisbury along Marine Parade. So there actually aren't any buses that would be using Monganui Road, would that be right?
So at the moment, no, not many. There is, I think, is the Golden Sands Express that you see listed up there runs, I believe, 3 a.m. and 4 p.m. services along Maunganui Road. Through there, and then where are we going? I think that little text box there, which isn't really readable, does indicate that there are some services that go along there, but some of them do. I mean, it's true that the majority of services are doing, in effect, that dogleg in and out of Girvan Road to go along farm links. There aren't many services. There aren't many services that go direct along Maunganui Road. So
The point could be that if there was a dedicated bus lane, especially for express services, there might be a redesign of the service, because that's the crucial part for an express bus, is to get it there as fast as possible. Is that correct? You're anticipating the possibility of that?
Yeah.
Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. Through the chair, what consideration is given for vehicles with 3 or more people sharing a bus lane?
Through the chair, can you elaborate a bit more by what considerations you mean?
So you're talking about public transport and buses having the express lane. Can vehicles with 3 or more people also utilise a bus lane?
Well, this is a conversation, I think, to be had through the UFD project team work. You can have any combination of those depending on what's fit for purpose for that corridor or for the city, basically. So in principle, yes. Any of these combinations, as I said earlier, it could be bus only, it could be bus and car sharing, it could be bus, car sharing and trucks, it could be bus, car sharing, trucks, cycles. Any combinations, we just have to take the time to work out what the best combination is.
And it can also be flexible, using those signs to change depending on road conditions, etc. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, with the right supporting infrastructure in place on the roadside in terms of ramps and monitoring and what have you, then yes, you can.
Can you go back to the first slide, please, Mark? We probably should have started. When you were going to comment on Barks Corner, Elizabeth Takitimu, I think.
I was planning to talk about Barks and Takitimu in the last 2 slides.
Moving on then to another slide. Any further questions? I noticed that all of the flyovers are 2-lane, one way, one each way, and you're suggesting ways to maximise those. Is that because concern is now arising that we may not have future-proofed it enough, that we possibly should have looked at wider flyovers? How far out did you model that with the design of it?
So this really comes back to, I guess, a point I made at a committee a year or 2 ago. The Baylink design was designed under previous GPS that was very roads, expressway, 4 lanes, general traffic type focus. The work we've done so far on this, given that the Transport Agency is committed to delivering this, we're building it on the ground, is under the new GPS, what would this footprint look like if it was more multimodal? It's not about can we fit more lanes in, it's what would this design look like if it was prioritised more for buses and car sharing and that kind of approach. So the actual, I think the option where this one here, if you look on the right there, we know enough about the profile of the flyover that will be in construction between through the Baylink footprint, that there is an option to not just have 2 lanes but have a 3rd tidal flow lane in there that you could operate in peak hours only. So in the morning peak, you could operate that in the morning in that direction, in the evening that direction out to Papamoa.
one of those truck things to put a lane down or something? Is that how it would work?
I guess so, yeah. We'd need to think about how, in practice, that would be made to work.
Okay, other questions? Councillor Carrack?
On that, as I pointed out, the afternoon peak is free flowing because it spills out onto the Eastern Link motorway. So really, I think the need for additional capacity via a tidal lane isn't required. It's really the morning peak, which is the essential one. And so, yeah, obviously you do the modelling around that because of that bottleneck up Hewletts. And that's many years away, I assume, from being rectified. Actually, just on that topic, what's currently NZTA's work plan around Hewletts Road? Is that still some time away? Looking at options to improve capacity?
Through the chair, this is a high priority issue for the UFD project team, and so that will be, and these options linked to that. There are other options, smaller scale options for Hewletts Road around managing side access, left in, left out type systems, and changing the signals along there that we're also keen to continue to progress with our partners. That's work in progress through the UFD project team at the moment.
So basically everything is done with partners. There's nothing you're looking at doing on your own.
So this work here has been done with TCC staff and regional council staff thinking, informing that. So there's nothing we do here that is not in partnership.
Mark, given the funding constraints the agency is facing with these the investigations around that Girvan Road project and the bus lanes, bus corridors, is the agency open to Tauranga City Council providing funding for that work to continue with the better business, the business cases, and so we might get to construction instead of waiting for another 3 years for the next funding round?
So I believe this was suggested at the stakeholder meeting, and our chief executive gave a pretty clear signal that we are open to having others fund this work. Nobody says no to free money, I guess, but so I think the short answer is yes, that's a serious option for us.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, then Councillor Morris.
With respect to Hewletts Road, from the city through out to Bay Fair, from about 3 o'clock you're stuck on just after the flyover, and you crawl all the way to Bay Fair, and then you get to Bay Fair, and it's free flowing. So I disagree with Councillor Carrack that there is definitely a bottleneck at Bay Fair from 3 o'clock onwards till about 6 o'clock. But in terms of the morning traffic, so from Papamoa, if I'm leaving at around 9:15, it takes me 20 minutes to get to work. If I leave around 8:15, it's 50 minutes to get to work, and you can queue anywhere from outside Bay Park, outside Bay Fair, all the way, and crawl all the way through to Hewletts. You go down Hewletts Road and you get to the second set of lights, and it's free flowing. So my question around NZTA and Hewletts Road and the traffic lights, if it appears that it's all about the timing of those lights, is do NZTA tell us or dictate to our TTOC centre when the phasing is in and out and what gets priority, or is it set by us? How does it work? Because clearly it's just the traffic lights, and at times the lights we're waiting and there's no traffic off the side roads, but when you get to when you get to Jean Batten Drive, you can do speed limit. So is it us that sets the timing for the lights and the phasing on Hewletts, or is it NZTA? Is it a combination?
Through the chair, I could probably have a crack at this one. So we work in combination with NZTA our staff quite closely around phasing of lights on the state highway network. I mean, Hewletts Road is always a challenge, particularly when we get to the Totara Street intersection. There's such heavy demand from the side road there coming from the mount that creates a significant challenge to see who's got the priority at what time of the day. So it's all about trying to optimise the network to try and get the throughput of traffic as best we can at different times of the day. So the phasing is constantly being tweaked.
Can you please define constantly? Like, is it daily, hourly, weekly?
Well, there's a team looking at it daily, yeah.
Councillor Morris?
Thank you. Just picking up on Hewlett's Road again, and it might be something that crosses responsibilities. I was just reading the Bay Plenty Times, the paper of record in the city, and there's actually an article by Kitty in 26th of Jan 2018, and in it there was a discussion from Tauranga City Council staff about introducing a transit lane T3 on Hewlett's Road. Timeframes given were by law by March, after consultation with affected parties, and then by the end of the by the end of the year, things being sorted. Now, what's holding us up there? Obviously, we don't own the road; it's owned by NZTA. But is it enforcement? I know in Auckland they collect the northern up in the northern motorway. They collect something like $700,000 a year in fines from people who are not doing the right thing. So, can we get a T3 on Hewlett's Road as soon as possible? And if not, what are the impediments that are slowing that down?
Through the chair, so we did report to a previous city committee meeting on this. We took the view earlier this year, I think it was, that based on the consultation we had, there were concerns about the additional traffic using that lane, lowering the level of service for cyclists who use that lane along that stretch of Hewlett's Road. And there was also concern raised by Regional Council about the effect it would have on bus services operating on there. So based on that, the decision was made to investigate that further before we proceed with opening up that lane. And I think now we're in the position of saying, well, actually from an overall travel demand perspective, we need to see what the overall corridor picture or demand for car sharing could be along the corridor as a whole, not just along a short section of Hewlett's Road, which is the kind of thinking we're trying to push forward here.
Okay, you like to carry on then with your next points? Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. So I'll just give you an update on the roundabout metering trials on the theme of optimization that we've been carrying out at Barks Corner and Elizabeth Avenue. Here are some initial results that you might be interested in. The trial is still ongoing and the results aren't definitive. There's still a way to go to count all these, but you'd be interested in seeing some of the results. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the operation, we've got in the morning peak, if I can read that correctly, the lights come on State Highway 29A on this approach here, if depending on the queues and delays on Pius Parr Road, and the reverse happens in the PM. So what we're seeing in blue is the good news in terms of changes in delay, reductions in delay for these approach arms, and the red, I guess, is the bad news for those customers who are affected. So what we're seeing in the morning is, because of the roundabout metering, we're getting a reduction in delay along Pius Parr Road of around 100 seconds compared to what we were having before. But we're also, of course, getting, because we're signalizing it, we're getting about half a minute extra delay along that section of State Highway 29A that we're signalizing. In the evening peak, we're getting, because of the lights coming on Pius Parr Road, we're getting a reduction in delay of about 30 seconds for traffic coming along from Taurika. And we're also getting quite a big reduction in delay for the traffic coming along Cameron Road, around about 100 seconds there in the PM. We're also getting an increase in delay of about half a minute for traffic coming along Poiki, State Highway 29A there. So those are the initial results as we go forward on that one. I'll just summarize where we are with Elizabeth Street and Takatima Drive. So that's been open since early April, so these are even more preliminary data, but these are operating in the morning peak only.
And there we're finding that we're getting a slight increase in delay because of the lights on the Takituma Drive approach here of about 5 seconds, but we're getting a much more significant, very helpful reduction in delay, I think, of about 200 seconds, or more than 3 minutes, I guess, of traffic coming from the north there into the roundabout. So that's a much more encouraging and, I guess, clear-cut result of this type of improvement can make.
Councillor Malloy.
Not living at Piceborough anymore, I'll leave that to Councillor Baldock to comment on. But I have struck State Highway 29 from Oropi Road going west in the PM, and that is chock-a-block from Barks Corner right down to Oropi Road at times. Is there unintended consequences of this, like pushing traffic volumes along other routes, etc., like heading up Oropi Road instead of going up the bypass?
That's a really good question. The answer at the moment is I don't know, but we are monitoring those diversion effects to see where they are and how big they are.
Councillor Robson.
Will there be an economic analysis done? So we're looking at time savings or time increments, but time times the number of people for whom that time savings or that time increase applies. Will there be some sort of attempt to quantify the net benefit of this? Because this thing tells me 2/5 of not very much at the moment. So I'm looking for, is that the intent, to do a proper economic analysis?
Through the chair, yes. This was done as part of one of our low-cost, low-risk projects for the State Highway Programme. As part of that, it would have had a BCR attached to it based on the delays or reductions in delays we were expecting. We'll then, when we get to the end of the trial, compare that to what we're actually getting, quantify those travel time benefits, and see whether that BCR that we predicted is what we've actually got.
Notice the on the State Highway 29A that often people aren't stopping for the lights. Are we monitoring that? Because they get frustrated, they just keep going.
I've had no reports. We've had no reports of that. I do know that we've had a look at we're keeping an eye on the crash records and safety records as a result of this. To date, we've had nothing reported in terms of crashes while the lights are on. So that would be new. There might be minor incidents like that that could become bigger incidents, and we'd have to keep an eye on that, I think.
Wouldn't 4 lights eventually, be able to redistribute the pain around so that everybody gets a bit of a saving at different times? Because that's sort of inevitably what people are thinking needs to happen, that you can't stop that queuing down Cameron Road until you start holding up the other side of 29A, and in the evenings at least. Are you looking at fully signalising the roundabout?
I think we did look at it as one of the options before we committed to this one. I think we'd have to have another look at that again at the end of the trial. I think since then as well, the UFT partnership is starting to gain momentum in terms of what the near-term priority work could be, and this could form part of that as well.
In regards to Elizabeth Street, are you looking at the evening peak problems there with having a light on Takitimu for the traffic coming from the north? Because that queues all the way up Elizabeth Street, as you know, to Cameron Road.
I'm not sure that's an active conversation at the moment, perhaps, but I'm aware that there is some constraint around the George Street access that might stop us doing this. It might. Glasgow, sorry.
Glasgow. I was wondering, Martin, I wonder if you might, if that's if you're aware of that constraint as an issue.
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, we are aware of the issues in the area, but it's part of a wider piece of work with regards to the Cameron Rail multimodal study, and also through to what's occurring in the city centre as well with Elizabeth Street, street upgrades and things like that. So it is a wider piece of work that needs to be considered in the context of this trial.
Councillor Mason?
I guess what you lose on the swings, you gain on the roundabouts. But the question was, with regard to the sensitivity around if there were more people having 2 or 3 or more people in the vehicle, is there anything around that, how that would impact the time delays?
We've not looked at through these projects what the potential impacts of encouraging high occupancy vehicle use would be, or car sharing. Again, I suppose that comes back to that previous suggestion that that kind of priority managed lane approach could be applicable here in some form. And if it is, we'd have a look at what would be the mode shift effect of that and what would be the impact on traffic delay as well. But it's again, I think that comes down to some thinking and design work that needs to be done in partnership.
Okay, we might move on to our agenda items. If that's all you're presenting, Mark, has that covered all? I wonder if you might still be here for a little bit longer in case we have questions as we go through the decisions about the options we have for us in regard to the funding. Yep, that'll be great. We hope to get there. Claire, thank you for coming there, and Christine.
So just as an introduction, so we've previously reported to Council around the issues of the NZTA funding. And we recently received the letter from NZTA, which was copied to you informally, advising which projects were in the approved category, the likely category, and the unlikely category. So as you can see from the report, what we've done is try to do an analysis of each of all of those projects, assess the broad options, and presented you with the recommendation. And we've also made some comments around NZTA state highway projects and opportunities to progress those. So perhaps if it takes any general questions, and then we could perhaps work through the local road section and then work through the state highway section would be a way we could progress.
Any general questions? I have one, and then it's Councillor Clout, I think, has his hand up. Just when the Bay of Plenty Regional Council offered to underwrite 51%, we raised the question of from where would they fund that, and because we didn't seem, it wasn't sort of as generous as it could be if it was just going to be another targeted rate on our ratepayers. Have we had clarity on that?
We haven't had clarity on that, and at the time they made that offer, it was around underwriting, which was effectively interim funding until the NZTA funding came through. NZTA made it abundantly clear that there's no retrospective funding, so now the decision is funded by an alternative source, not effectively what Regional Council at the time was offering was financing. That's not to say that they would not be interested in funding, and they have signalled that they would be open to that discussion. So we have talked to the senior staff recently. They haven't given any indication of the funding source.
Okay, Councillor Clout, then Carrack. Councillor Carrack.
In the open forum, it was raised about the inclusion of retirement villages having quite an impact on the supply side, and the claim was 60%. Have you got any comment around that? Oh, sorry, why jumping ahead? How embarrassing.
No problem. So let's go as your suggestion to the to our own roads, which will be the attachment A first of all, I think. Is that right? 15th Ave. All right, is there a general question there? Yep.
Through the chair, Christine, you said no retrospective funding. Is that under any circumstances that they will not retrospectively fund any of these projects, even if we only go ahead with the planning part of it?
So that's what's been signalled, particularly in respect to construction funding.
Thank you.
Clout.
Thank you. It's general in so much that if you add up the figures in the table on paragraph 24, which is about 1.9 million additional rate funded loan required, and then you compare it to paragraph 26, which talks about unbudgeted capital expenditure of more than 4 million. Can you just reconcile those two numbers, please?
So that's based on what decisions you take within this meeting. So if that loan funded capital expenditure goes over that $4 million threshold, then that would trigger the significance policy.
So there's one big credit in there for the cycle plan. So while the net is less than 4 million, the pluses and the minuses each are over the thresholds. Yeah.
15th Avenue, recommendation, options and recommendations. Can you speak to that?
For 15th Ave, this is a staged project. The stage one is that widening of the downstream merge from Fraser Street into 15th Ave towards Turret Road and the signalisation of the Burrow Street intersection. So NZTA have signalled that they feel this is unlikely to receive funding. At this point, our recommendation is to continue with the business case and planning for the later stages, which include for some corridor management on Fraser Street and the longer-term widening project of Stage 2, but to proceed with the construction works for Stage 1. They are tender ready and subject to a PSOC conversation.
Right, Councillor Granger.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just a couple of questions. First of all, one, could we join or phase some of these stages a little closer together with the likes of stage 1, 2 and 3? And with the stage 1 coming on board, you say that the construction is certainly unlikely, and I presume that's because there's not much in the way of any bus lanes, etc. included on that. I'm saying here is if we link those stages together, would we have more likely, a greater chance of the construction happening?
So we've tried to find the balance of that with option 1, with just proceeding with the smaller part of the project, and then putting the signalisation projects, the corridor management on Fraser Street, into a later stage to try and give us the greatest chance of getting funding for those stages.
Just further to that though, I presume these later stages were held back because of the major reasons of finishing the Bayfair construction and project over there. We've often asked why in that case can we not move a little quicker, because I personally think that we can. Why have to wait for the one over the mount to be finished, where I feel that 15th Ave, in my mind, could be moved a lot earlier.
I think this is probably a more detailed conversation around the project itself for the Project Services Committee, but for the for Stage 1A, that's a construction-ready project. For Stage 2, the delay is to allow us to use the new transport model to properly consider the effects of those projects on the wider system. And for the Stage 2, which is the 4-laning essentially, coming up towards the 15th Ave Fraser Street intersection, that was the one that was delayed to allow for the Bay Link construction to be completed.
The recommended option is to continue with business case work for those. At the moment, we don't have business case approved for those subsequent stages. So what we're asking, and there is no funding for that. So at the moment, if you didn't pass these resolutions, there'd be no funding from NZTA for the business case for those subsequent stages and no work would commence. What we're suggesting is do some of those quick wins in stage 1, continue with the investment in the business case in the subsequent stages so that we can then put forward a case for the funding for those subsequent stages and be ready. So what the NZTA signalled is while the fund is fully allocated, if for any reason any authority doesn't pick up the funding, then it will go back into the pool and becomes competitive. So what we want to do is to have projects ready with business cases complete, like the stages 2 and 3 of 15th Avenue, that we can then put up and try to source that funding at that point in time. So that's what the recommendations are trying to achieve.
Yeah, look, I can understand that. And the point I'm trying to make here, is there any chance, any opportunity to move this a little quicker, the completion of the force?
Can I just, through the chair, just say something about stage 2, which is the 4 laning. There's been no detailed design work done on stage 2. So even if we started that piece of work today, we'd be at least 12 months away from actually going out to any form of tender on stage 2. So there's a whole heap of work to do on stage 2 before we even could go to put a spade in the ground.
So what I think we'll do is go through these projects. We don't want to be here all day. We've all read the reports, we've seen the recommendations from staff. Can we just try and go through and question specifically without going beyond the scope of what's in front of us? We're just trying to restart these projects that we've put on hold and some other things there. So any other questions specifically on 15th Ave? Did you have Councillor Mason on that or not?
It's kind of, I should have asked it earlier with the general questions, but it's just sort of occurred to me as we're going through this. Can I have your indulgence? Thank you. It's a general question in relation to the timing and how long what's the sort of shelf life of a business case, where, you know, if we're putting them on the shelf, waiting for the potential for opportunity, and then we put it in so sort of just in time, but it may not be valid any longer because things have moved on, technology changed or whatever. Is there danger of doing too much planning because maybe we'll get some money? Just wondering about where that sits.
So ideally the business case approach is meant to future-proof against those changes in direction and choose the right solution for the right problem. In reality, there's a balance there around responding to government policy statements and the government of the day and what direction they want to set. So I think with the majority of these projects, they do have a limited shelf life for business cases, but what we're proposing is to proceed with the business case and then look at it each quarter when NZTA do their review, with a view to funding through the next NLTP if there's nothing forthcoming in this one. That is subject to a change in government direction should the government change. But that would probably be a tweaking of how that responds to the government's priorities rather than a full rewrite.
Okay, supplementary, Councillor Brown, I'll come back to you because it's the same subject.
So in the same vein, we're seeing now, like 6 months apart, the cost explosion. So we'll get to re-budget and reforecast and resubmit because nothing's going to go down.
Councillor
Yes,
Malloy?
that's correct.
Yeah, through the chair, seeing you dispensing indulgences, if I may, a general. If we say yes to the CEO, I guess if we say yes to all of the recommendations here, what budgetary impact does that have? Is it an issue for us, or can we handle it?
Well, I'll defer to Paul for that answer.
So, through the chair, we can handle it. As you know, when we went through the planning process, we had quite a large amount of smoothing, for want of a better word, in terms of actually how we manage those overall finances. So what we'd suggest is we would incorporate that within by adjusting these projects and balance that, so there'll be no rating impact in the for the upcoming rating year. Obviously, there will be future conversations that will need to occur in terms of the flow-on impact of that, because there will be a debt servicing impact that will continue to carry forward. So that will need to be brought back into future annual plans and long-term plans.
Right, so that's 15th Avenue. Recommended option is to continue with stage 1 using local share, complete business cases for subsequent stages and hold until funding becomes available. Moving on to cycle plan. Recommendation is to simply do what we can. Progress low cost, low risk improvements, correct? Which are still an option, and the planning and design work to leverage future NZTA funding. Any questions on that? We'll go on then to Domain Road upgrade. Recommendation is to proceed, complete the project as planned. Questions, Councillor Morris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bumpy rural road in the heart of New Zealand's 5th largest city. Councillor Brown's got some photos of it this morning. What are the improvement elements that NZTA are unlikely to fund?
So there are a range of different elements to this project. So there are some intersection improvements along the route. There is some localised widening as part of those intersection improvements. There are improved pedestrian and cycle facilities, including some pedestrian crossings, I think a refuge for the Wairaki drainage reserve paths and those sorts of things. So they're basically the capital elements of a wider rehabilitation and maintenance project.
Definitely includes the traffic lights at Doncaster still. That's not in jeopardy because that is absolutely critical to that network.
That's correct, yeah.
All right, moving on to state highway intersection improvements. Recommendation is to complete business case and hold any further construction until funding is secured. Questions about
Sorry, that
those?
one.
Oh,
That
sorry.
one is.
Oh, that's
just
Maunganui
removed.
Road. Sorry,
Yes,
I've jumped the
Maunganui.
page. Yes,
So
yes.
this was money we had in there for
Remove it.
remove it, and then
Yeah.
there's a separate conversation we'll have later about state highway investment.
Robson?
Request for the record, could we identify here and now for those thousands watching around the world, which state highway intersections we're suggesting that we relinquish potential funding back to the NLTF for? Which are the intersections we're talking about here?
Can you answer that?
So these were projects that were identified as part of the long-term plan as being a contribution from TCC to NZTA projects. They included Barks Corner and the Elizabeth Street intersection. Subsequently, NZTA decided to progress with a metering trial, and that funding is no longer required.
Just those two?
Yes.
And I assume they can be reassessed then at the next LTP, basically, is the idea. All right, so no more questions on those. Next is Maunganui Road improvements. Councillor Morris.
Just adjacent to one of the premier sports fields in the country and heavily utilised. Residents will be grateful for the angle parking along there, but I notice obviously construction's ongoing and there's fences up. While the roundabout issue is further investigated, will the remainder of the road be opened up once those works are complete and the parking becomes available? The angle parking?
Yeah, through the chair I can confirm that will happen, yep.
The option there is to complete the business case and hold any further construction until funding is secured, correct?
Yes, so this is one of the projects where NZTA assessed the funding as being likely to be secured for this project. So the idea would be to complete that business case, which I think is about 75% complete, and then review whether we continue with the project each quarter when NZTA review their funding situation.
Then on to Ngātai Road Cycleway, is that the next one? Recommended proceed with construction if and when funding approval is received from NZTA.
Yes, so the business case for Ngātai Road has been completed and submitted to NZTA for approval. So we identify that this would be a project that hopefully should work through their process as funding becomes available, and we should retain the funding in our annual plan to proceed with it as and when that funding is secured.
It got a likely status, did it, in the appraisal, yeah. Arataki multimodal stage 1, next one. Recommendation is continue with project as planned, using local share for cycleway and bus lane elements and leveraging funding from the low cost, low risk funding category for intersection improvements.
Yes, so there are 2 intersection improvements included in this project, that being the Girvan Road Marlin Street intersection, where we're having issues with buses being able to make that turn, and also the connectivity for children cycling to and from school. It's been raised with us consistently by the local community. And the other intersection is the Links, Concord and Farm Street intersection, where I think we've had a presentation in the public section of the Transport Committee previously, where video has been presented. It's quite a dangerous intersection and very difficult for those children, particularly travelling to the Mount Intermediate. The balance of the project is around the short length of bus lane on Granada Street and the trial separated cycleways. So the option to continue has been recommended because it's a trial during the construction of the Bay Link project. So we either proceed with it as a trial or we park the project altogether, because by the time we would be able to seek funding, that wouldn't be a viable trial anymore.
Questions on that one? Yes, Councillor Robson.
Can we have an update on the level of community support stroke engagement with regard to elements or key elements of this project?
So as I understand it, there has been a significant level of public engagement through these projects, and that will continue to be reported back through the Project Services Committee as the project progresses. So we're looking for an approval in principle to go ahead with these projects, but that being subject to decisions made within that Project Services Committee.
Right. Thank you. I had 2 elements to my question. One was community engagement, the other was community support. Have we got any feedback on the current level of community support around elements of these projects?
I would have to report back on that. I can speak to the project manager in that.
So next is the Cameron Road multimodal model. Recommended continue with business case, engagement and planning activities with a view to achieving funding for construction during 21 to 24 and LTP and not before. Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Malloy.
Thank you, through the chair. This one sort of raises red flags for me, particularly with regards to engagement with the people along Cameron Road, the businesses that would be impacted on. Where are we at with the level of engagement with the businesses along that corridor, please?
So we have contacted every business along that corridor, and where they have wanted to, we've had one-on-one meetings with every business owner or every business operator on Cameron Road with regard to what we think the future of that corridor might be, and trying to address any issues that they have at this point in time. So that engagement is well underway.
Are they, just if I may continue, are they supplying written feedback or just verbal at this stage?
Both. So they have, some people have supplied written feedback, which we've kept, and we've also recorded the outcomes of every meeting that we've had with those business owners.
Also gone back to those business owners and said, here's a summary of the things your points you've made, and that when we bring the technical work, so recall there's some technical work done about some of the lanes and whether they could be allocated to PT, whether intersection upgrades are required or priority at intersections. A whole series of options are being looked at, and we've undertaken that when that technical work's complete, the technical work will be presented to elected members together with the summary of their comments, and we will advise them when that meeting is available, will be held, and they'll be given, they'll be told that it will be on the website in terms of all the information, and that they're welcome to attend. So we've gone back to them and said we've not quite finished the technical work, and they will be kept in the loop as it moves forward.
Thank you. And if we could be provided with the written feedback at some stage, that would be helpful to inform us.
That will come
Thanks.
back together with the technical work so that you get both the community view of issues and concerns and the technical analysis, and then you give us direction as to where you want to go to next.
Councillor Mason, or is it supplementary to that? Yep, okay.
In terms of timing, is that work, the technical work, coming to this committee in 6 weeks or sooner through another committee? You said it's nearly finished.
And back to you, I think that's still, we had thought possibly by July, but that's not going to happen, and I don't know what the revised date is, so I haven't kept up to date with that. It could be, and we'd also had some conversation around whether this week at executive team about whether the dates for the meetings, so some of the meetings are finishing pre-election and things that were already partly underway, including like this where you've already engaged. We should probably do a close off this triennium so that work that's been undertaken in a sort of 6 to 9 month period is reported back to this council.
Councillor Mason?
Is one of the technical options that has perhaps gone one way or the other, from us to them or them to us, in relation to having sort of temporary PT lanes, so that those lanes were only used for peak time and then revert to parking during the rest of the day? Is that one of the options?
Yes, that's definitely one of the options that's being looked at. There are a range of options, but peak hour clearways would be a good start.
This is from Harrington to the hospital, basically, isn't it? And where does the Barks Corner to Greaton bit possibly fit with? Is it going to come in separately from somewhere?
Yes, so that's part of a later stage. So there's a short to medium term project which looks at the heaviest areas of bus use, which is the hospital to Harrington, and then the longer term project would be the whole corridor and longer term options, and that would tie in with the Te Papa spatial planning project as well.
I think the use of heavier bus use is kind of a qualified statement. Doesn't occur yet. And what I think we should be looking at is the heavier congestion area where buses are actually delayed. And in my opinion, that is Barks Corner to Greaton, where they are slowed considerably in peak times, affecting their efficiency, affecting their attractiveness and so on.
Through the Chair, I do think it was in the scope of the piece of the external work that we had done in terms of Greaton. It was one of the elements that you asked about. I'm not sure, Martin, whether it was picked up in that piece of work. We talked about the PT access into and out of Greaton, which is exactly this issue that you're raising. So,
yeah, through the Chair, yes, it was picked up in that discussion. The other point to make is that we need to get some pretty accurate information on bus time delays from the regional council as well to support this piece of work as well. So we can develop up some really good options around that.
Accurate information is really important, but we should, as long as we're getting it, we're beginning to progress that, because to me it does seem pretty clear. That's where schedules get thrown out, where buses are delayed, where people get frustrated. Just on that one little bit of road is where it happens.
Yes, so as part of the blueprint rollout, all of the buses are now GPS monitored, and we're starting to get some really good data out of regional council with regard to that.
Excellent, thank you. So next, seismic resilience of bridges. Recommended option.
any capital works that's a consequence going into future, need to prioritise that relative to other investments.
So Stuart.
Through the Chair. So for clarity, is the budget that we see before us on page 42, 600,000, 500,000, and then 2021, 500,000, is that all budgeted for consultants without any practical, I was going to say outcomes, without any capital works or construction?
Yep, so this is for planning work, business cases and early design. This isn't construction budget.
Okay, then we have Smith's Farm Access Road, recommended option, continue planning work. Oh, sorry, is that a question, Councillor Mayor Browners? Okay, yeah, so the recommended option, continue planning work and discussions with NZTA, is that what it is? Brownus?
When I look at that would, if there's only a subsidy, or whatever you call it, from NZTA of 21%, leaving nearly 8 million for us on 200 sections, it's nearly $40,000 a section. And I just don't know how practical that is. I think there have to be consequences for things, and when the funding was removed from the Northern Arterial, I sort of saw that as a natural consequence. So I've got concerns about that. It's so much, and you know, funnily enough, who'll end up paying it? Oh, we will. Yeah.
Comment from staff, Andy?
Yeah, I can comment on that. So at the moment we're going through some feasibility work for Smiths Farm. The road is a serious cost and a serious constraint on potentially around development of that site. So any NZTA subsidy that we can get could make a significant difference to whether that project proceeds or not. We will be bringing a separate report back to a future meeting of this committee to talk about that matter.
We could go ahead with this recommendation without, you know, and still hear your report come back dealing with the financial issues. Yeah. Councillor Malloy.
Regard to Smith Farm, are we talking to Housing New Zealand? I presume we are. I know that they are interested in it and in a partnership.
Discussions with Housing New Zealand, we're having discussions with Crown Infrastructure Partners, and we're having discussions with other parties that would be potentially able to fund some of the infrastructure rather than council having to take that debt on its balance sheet.
And the last one, Tauriko West Connections, again, just continue planning and discussions with NZTA as we've been doing for some time. Councillor Clout.
Thank you. I got the impression that this was looking at almost an interim access point so that we can continue or commence development within the Tauriko West new suburb. Is that right, or are we still waiting for NZTA to decide the alignment of State Highway 29?
This is looking at interim access options.
Andy, anything further to add?
Yeah, it certainly is looking at interim access options, but it's looking at more than that as well. So this is potentially looking at improvements around Cambridge Road, also a southern access to the Tauriko Business Estate, and funding for the first section of the Western Corridor Ring Road. So a substantial package of improvements that should enable a good portion of Tauriko West to be actually developed.
Okay, Councillor Malloy.
Given that you know we need that land with some urgency, there aren't any impediments to interim access if that's the way we need to go. That we can bring that on as quickly as possible without NZTA if necessary.
Andy.
So this is interim access onto State Highway 29, so there's no avoiding NZTA here. We need NZTA's approval. So the interim package of works that we are looking to progress through the planning design stage is currently in the NZTA processes for approval. So we're hopeful in the next few weeks we'll get the green light there, and we'll be working together in partnership, including with the relevant developers that will be funding some of these works.
Okay, so returning to page 18, elected members, there are 4 resolutions. Receive the report, approve business case and construction phases for the projects on a case-by-case basis. So if we would be moving either all the recommendations or any amendments to that, if you wish to. Approving staff to continue, I'll come there in a second, Councillor Malloy. Noting that if investment beyond existing budgets and carry forwards is required, that staff will bring the issue back to the committee for approval. Approve staff to engage with Bay Plenty Regional Council to discuss the opportunity of co-funding the Baylink bus/high occupancy vehicle priority planning project. Question? Sorry, a comment? Yes.
Could we just quickly look at paragraph 22, because in passing those resolutions you would be approving paragraph 22, and I just want to make sure councillors understand that that's what they're doing. So within there are 3 additional projects. So the ones that we were looking at were local roads. Previously these are all state highway projects. So one is to look at and engage with NZTA about investigating options of 15th Ave and an emergency access or an emergency access from 17th. So that would be state highway, so you'd effectively using ratepayer funds to progress that work, currently not in the NZTA state highway program. The second one is the presentation that Mark gave around the Bay Link public transport and high occupancy vehicles. So while some initial investigations has been done, because of the lack of NZTA funding in those categories, no further work has been commissioned. So if we want to see that work completed and potentially incorporated into the Bay Link construction program, we would need to fund that. So we're thinking, our understanding from talking to NZTA is that that's about $113,000 worth of work. We've had some initial discussions with the BOPRC, and they were willing to consider co-funding, so they've given us some positive signals, but it hasn't been decided at the council yet. And then the third area, but there would still be the issue of, once that's done, the funding construction cost and how that would be funded. And then the last year, as we came to you some time ago around Tauriko and the need to again step in due to the lack of NZTA funding, you approved us committing 100,000. Since then, we've done some further work, and we've looked at the subsequent stages once that piece of work's been done, including the more detailed modelling that would follow, and the total package would be in the vicinity of 300,000. Again, asking your support for TCC to actively fund and progress those matters in the absence of NZTA state highway funding, so that we can deliver these projects. So they would be incorporated in resolution 3.
Thank you for that clarification. Did you have a question, Councillor Malloy?
I did, if you don't mind. Just going back to the Arataki, I just want to understand the multimodal proposition that's been put forward. It doesn't, I know aspects of it will support, but it doesn't particularly, it's not around supporting the bus interchange. That is completely separate.
Yes, the bus interchange is a separate project, and it was essentially called Arataki Multimodal Stage 2.
Thank you. Christine, just on those three issues, thank you for bringing them up. I would like to have, in bullet point 2, just said, bullet point 1, sorry, that it was and or, including 15th Ave connection and or emergency, because we don't know whether they both might have value, or if we could do that amendment, then I'm certainly in favour of that. Councillor Carrack.
Bullet point 2, the co-funding, that would be half. Is that what the request would be?
We would certainly ask that of the Regional Council, and as I say, they've indicated a positive willingness to do so, and then have it a joint project between ourselves, Regional Council and NZTA.
So that could be subject to that co-funding, we could agree. Yeah. The next one, we're talking about CapEx there?
No, it would be OPEX, because it's not our asset, so we can't capitalise it. And what we've been saying in terms of this whole sort of growth area, in terms of OPEX, we are carrying forward all of the unspent money that we've got in the budget, and you approved that when you approved the draft budget the other day. And we've signalled that we would do our best to work within existing budgets, and if we get partway through the year and it's evident that we're going to be short, we'll come back. So there's a lot of unknowns in here. There's all the work around Te Papa, including extensive community engagement. There's the work around Te Ariko. We're trying to push harder on progressing some of the Te Tumu elements in terms of the technical work. So what we've said is we won't seek additional money. We'll try to work within existing. So we could do this in the same manner, and we'll just closely monitor it and let you know how we're progressing.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions, or did you have one, John? Yes?
Sorry, thank you. I noticed in para 25 we talked about CapEx and rates impact for 1920 being tabled at the committee meeting. It would have been helpful if we'd had that, but also the implications going through 2021 as well, because that's the period we're talking about allocating these over. I think I get the feeling.
They were delivered to us this morning at about 8:30, so we can distribute those because we're working right to the wire on this, because the notification from NZTA was
and
close.
I suppose,
yeah.
Thank you. That's again confirming the point that I was going to make. We're once again working under significant time constraints.
largely because of a significant change in government's approach, well, significant change in government, frankly, which has been accompanied by a significant change in approach. It would be helpful to have that information in front of us. So I appreciate the delivery. A gift is a gift no matter how late.
Is it total though?
So this is committee, your team, you probably haven't even had a chance to review it yet. Can you check with Paul?
If
Could I
you'd
move,
like
Chair,
to,
that we adjourn for
yeah,
lunch?
if we could adjourn, that would be fine. But I'll call us back at 1. I have lined Veros to come in at 1 for the planning study, so we'll just have them wait 15 minutes while we come back to this and then hopefully pass these resolutions. Is that okay? That'll give us some speed reading over lunch. So we'll adjourn for lunch back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.